Online retailer Farfetch is betting it can shape the future. This is its concept store, showcasing the latest in retail tech.
How do you capture all of that fantastic information that you gather in store with customers, touch and feel products? And we created a concept called the connected rail. And this is using a combination of RFID and ultrasound. The RFID signal recognizes the product and the ultrasound recognizes the movement. Take the product off and then you'll start to see your products appear. And essentially it's like online browsing behavior. Whichever products you touch and pick up in the store are automatically sent to your app. This is effectively what you've created is your in-store wish list. In the middle you'll see essentially a hologram of the product. What the customer sees, they control the experience on a touch device. What this allows the customer to do is take elements of products and then add their own style to it. Right, so this is the connected mirror. So in this example I see my products. I select a coat and that's tried it and it's slightly too big for me. So what I can do is choose an alternative size and send a request to the sales associate and they'll bring that size to me in the fitting room mirror. You'll also see that we've got some product recommendations here. Crucially, the sales associate's able to push items into the mirror from their device. If you wanted to, you could simply use the mirror and pay and go. Your items would then be packed and dispatched to you afterwards.
Do you want me to turn you so you're looking outwards?
Yes, please.
Yes, please. How about there. First time we came out with B, Jade said, it feels like I've been released from prison. Do you want these, Mrs?
Definitely.
Definitely. Right.
Yeah.
And she could say hello to everybody, people she hadn't seen for months.
It's
Hi, it's Jade.
Oh. So you can talk to Jade through this.
Hi, Katie. She's there.
Hi.
Every time anyone's seen her, they want to know why she's there. And it's kind of the opposite of when you're in a wheelchair and people see you and they kind of go, oh, should I look? I don't know what the right protocol is. When there's a tiny robot with its bright little eyes going around just looking happy everywhere, it really opens you up for conversation.
You've got some friends here, look.
Hiya! When I saw her for the first time, I remember thinking, this is going to change things. This is one of those points where if this was a book, this would be the cliffhanger. I have a condition called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which means that I have a lot of dislocations, there's a lot of pain, and a lot of seizures and whatnot. So I can end up on my own in my room for long periods of time. A lot of the time, with a condition like my own, of course there's the pain, and the pain is bad, and the dislocations are bad, and the seizures and being in paralysis and never knowing whether you're going to be able to wake up properly tomorrow, that's bad. But what's worse still is being able to count the number of people you see a day on one hand.
Are you ready?
Sure am, I'm just hoping the connection's going to stay.
Yeah, me too. Alright, here we go.
When you're used to just the same little metre by metre and a half window every day, and you've been there for months, being able to just see the sky from somewhere else, or the tops of trees, or a sign, is incredible. Or being able to have that kind of chat in the car that most people would probably take for granted.
I'm going to go past Grandma and Grandad so you can give them a wave. Now, if Jade is particularly seizure-y, she can still take part. And that's brilliant, really, because before she would just be left in a bed or in a house with just her carers. It's quite a small world, that.
Right, so there's one of her. Here, this costume I'm busy making at the moment. When I'm not on bed rest and I'm not just wearing pyjamas all the time, I enjoy being able to dress as different characters and go to Comic Cons and that kind of thing, because it just lets me show a different side of myself, and it's a bit of fun. If you can't go out that often, you've got to enjoy it when you do. Was that? Good. It's one of those weird things where I want to not have to use B because I want to be well enough to be able to go to those places myself. Like, it really makes a big difference to me to be able to go into school. But the thing is, with my condition fluctuating all of the time, I can't go into school reliably. He's written it out bigger on the board. Thank you. Today's the first day that I've been in school via B, and so far it's interesting. Still a few little things that we need to work out, but for the most part I think it's going fairly well. And it's brilliant because I can really tell the difference between today and yesterday. How yesterday I forced myself to go into school when I wasn't very well, and I was really tired afterwards and ended up having loads of seizures. Whereas today I've been able to do all of the work, I've been able to keep a clear head and not be ill, which means I'm able to be more focused on my schoolwork.
So there is my first step of working, is to simplify root 8. The algebra test is next week.
Now I'm trying to make friendships which I'll be able to maintain with B. Before that, I end up letting people down quite often. B gives me hope, yeah. She's just always there. And if I can't do something, she can. And if I need sort of assistance to be able to make commitments, then she's there, and she means that I feel like a more valuable person because I'm more reliable.
When it debuted, the 4G wireless we have today allowed people for the first time to hit the road and explore unknown places with only a smartphone for directions. When 5G arrives, it could enable driverless cars to take us there as well. 5G stands for 5th generation mobile networks or wireless systems. It's insanely fast and can accommodate a lot more connected devices. But the reason it's being called revolutionary is because 5G will allow connected devices to speak to each other as well as people.
Right now we're living in a world where really it's a one-way experience.
That's Bloomberg tech reporter Ian King.
The network talks to your phone, you look at your phone and access data, then you send something back to the network. What we're being told about 5G is that really for the first time we're going to see machines communicating with each other over mobile networks in a meaningful way.
5G could end up being 100 times faster than what we have now, with speeds that could reach 20 gigabits per second. In plain English, that means downloading a full-length HD movie in seconds. 5G will also increase total bandwidth, which we will need in order to accommodate the growing Internet of Things. We're talking about the class of devices like internet-connected refrigerators, thermostats, dog collars, but 5G will enable many, many more.
Things like your utility network, factories, where machines are just sat there not connected at all. Suddenly they're all going to be connected. Suddenly we're going to be able to have real-time monitoring. Other things like cars, like utility poles, like your light, you know, the light poles.
But perhaps the biggest advance will be a huge reduction in communication lag time, known as latency. A network of driverless cars will need the speed of 5G to ping each other multiple times per second to avoid collisions. Near instantaneous data transfers could allow doctors to perform surgery remotely with a robotic scalpel. So how will all this work? First, you need to improve network density.
And that's just a fancy word for saying you put more towers out there. What we're being told is that's not actually the case with 5G.
The idea is 5G will not only use the existing mobile spectrum, but also tap into higher frequencies called millimeter waves. Millimeter waves can carry more data, but only travel short distances. This may mean you'll see a lot more of these base stations around town. And the new towers may have as many as 100 antenna ports, compared to about a dozen on 4G cell towers. So when will we get 5G? Getting 5G ready is expected to cost providers $275 billion over 7 years in the US alone. Look for the first 5G service to pop up in big cities sometime in 2019.
The cubicle represents a tyranny. It confines your imagination, your thoughts, into a small physical area. Imagine pretty much every software engineer or finance person being able to, disconnect from their desk and look at holographic monitors on a beach and doing their work from there. That's not going to be science fiction. It's the modern office place.
Silicon Valley is all about building the future. A startup called Meta thinks it's getting there first, thanks to a big bet that it's made on augmented reality.
How are you?
Good, thank you. Welcome to Meta.
Thank you.
Call it a 360-degree office where you can spatialize your thoughts as part of your workflow for education, architecture, design, engineering, etc.
People often mix up augmented reality with virtual reality. VR totally blocks your ability to see or hear the real world. AR overlays holograms onto what you already see. Meta has tried to make its version of the workspace feel familiar.
You grab the hologram instead of using a controller or a mouse, and your brain already knows how to do it. In other words, we've designed an operating system that humanity has always known how to use. So you can see this eyeball, which is, by the way, photorealistic. You can see my hand is occluding the eyeball, and now the eyeball is occluding my hand, right? You see those two circles? They get small, and then they turn into this glowing white ball, and then I can move my hand around supernaturally. I can do this with two hands and rotate the thing. I could stretch it. I could throw it back right into the shelving system, and that's all you have to learn to become a modern worker.
And to prove this, the employees at Meta have started to get rid of their computer monitors, trading them in for Meta's augmented reality headsets. Myron thinks that in less than a decade, we'll all be just wearing strips of glass that can project holograms.
In the early 80s, everybody had computers on their desktop, but no one was using them because they had a lot of work to do. So they were still using typewriters. And at some point, the CEO took all the typewriters away and everybody was forced to use their computers. So it's very exciting to see a new generation of technology, a new paradigm.
I consider us like pioneers in the holographic wild. I'm pulling up my browser with my hands and sending out emails to colleagues and just kind of really acclimating to the new environment.
Now you're putting on my computer, essentially. Our digital lives live on our phones. We have all of our pictures and notes and all these kinds of things. So why don't you write yourself a little sticky note? I like it. And go ahead and just take your fist right over the top of the sticky note and close your fist. And now...
Oh, what? Meta's own transition to augmented reality has run into plenty of unexpected problems. And it's still going to be a while before you'll start to see these devices in your office. But I think it's a future worth waiting for.
If we could see these holograms between us, we will have been able to share our work with one another more naturally, more efficiently, and more productively than ever before. Humanity will have evolved slightly.
This is Hatsune Miku, Japan's sensational virtual pop star. She's released over 100,000 songs in multiple languages and performed sold-out concerts around the world. Her image has appeared in games, on TV, in car races, and is even etched on the side of a Japanese space rocket.
I came for Hatsune Miku, Carlos.
She's Lady Gaga's favorite digital pop star and opened shows for her in the US 3 years ago. Tens of thousands of fans attended her exhibition and live shows near Tokyo recently.
理想のアイドルっていうと、どの曲でもミクはすごい綺麗に歌ってくれる。
他没有缺点啊，没有任何让我们感到不开心的一些新闻。
She's everything to everybody. That's probably why she's so popular.
Miku's creator Hiroyuki Ito and his Sapporo-based company have been developing the virtual diva for over 10 years.
初音ミクとは、キャラクターとしてすごく、YouTube とかで検索すると、たくさんの初音ミクが出てくるんですけども、元々の、初音ミクのその原点は歌声を合成する、ソフトウェアなんです。
Both the software and character are named Hatsune Miku, meaning the first sound of the future. Originally based on Yamaha's Vocaloid technology, Miku the software has a sound bank containing voice samples and a huge array of tools. You input the melody and lyrics, then Miku the character sings them. To date, Krypton has sold 120,000 software licenses at $200 each to fans around the world who use it to create numerous songs and share them online. Some of the fan-created songs are chosen to be part of Miku's concerts, for which they're paid a royalty fee.
もともと初音ミクっていうその、存在自体がそのボトムアップって言いますか、中にはアマチュアクリエイターじゃなくて今もうすでに、プロになって活躍している方もいらっしゃるんですけども。
The company also has other revenue streams. It makes money from merchandising, licensing deals, and concert ticket sales. According to the real-life musicians who perform with Hatsune Miku, the virtual pop star is interesting and surprising.
今年で3年ぐらい、ちょうど3年ぐらいになってきて、ライブも数十本、数百本やったと。そういうことが演奏によって起こせるためのそういう器みたいな感じになってきて。初音ミクらしさって僕はあんまりない。初音ミクって何だってあり。
For Ito, Miku has the potential to change the way we think about music.
そういう新しいそのテクノロジーによって新しい音楽のあり方っていうものを模索していきたいと思っていました。
And for her fans, it goes even further.
ミクって魂がないので、だからみんな魂を作り上げるために存在する。
Now, there are a lot of fitness gadgets out there. In my quest to get fit, I tested 17 of them over the last few months. At least one personal trainer I know was a little bit skeptical.
Yeah, I've been watching these new technologies come to the market for almost as long as I've been a personal trainer. They're just tricks and tropes. They're not much different than the Bowflex machines or, to be honest, the original Jane Fonda workout video.
But some of these gadgets that are just coming to the market do so much more than what they used to do, just tracking your activities. Out of all of them, this chest strap was my favorite. It comes with a robot coach that points to the future, one where you might not need a human trainer at all. And it works like this. You wear the chest strap so that it can read your heart rate, and that connects to Move's free app that talks to you.
Welcome to Move Heart Rate Hit Outdoor Running. Let's get moving and warm up in zone 2.
Move's computerized coach tells you what to do at that exact moment, whether you're running outside or you're doing body weight exercises indoors.
Swing your arms faster to get your legs moving quicker. Let's crush this round.
And by reading your heart rate, she knows exactly how hard you're working. She keeps you honest.
Way to go, you are in the target zone. Keep pushing, you're almost at the end of the round. Don't give up.
I've been running for 7 years now, and my biggest problem is that I never push myself hard enough. I end up going on the same slow, comfortable 30-minute jog, but the Move HR Burn blasted me out of that rut. By the end of these half-hour exercises, I was drenched in sweat in a way that I never am when I work out alone. Training with a real person is great, whether that's your group instructor or your coach or your personal trainer, but humans, they're expensive. For the rest of us, this $60 gadget is all you need.
what does it take to change the world? A big army? A cure to a pandemic? A revolution? All of these take either a lot of people, thousands of hours, or massive amounts of space. But for Julian Assange, all he needs is one room, an internet connection, and the world will listen. Assange is located here, and more specifically, right here. And from that location, he's posted government secrets, classified documents, and leaked emails from some of the world's most powerful people. And in doing so, has been labeled a hero, a villain, a nihilist, and everything in between. This is how an Australian programmer sequestered in the Ecuadorian embassy in London became one of the most influential and notorious people in the world. Born in 1971 in Townsville, Australia, Assange has always been on the move. Living in over 30 homes by the time he was in his mid-teens, Assange, along with his mother and half-brother, finally settled down in Melbourne. His introduction to hacking started at 16 when he was given a Commodore 64, which he attached to a modem. He attended the University of Melbourne, where he studied programming, physics, and mathematics. He never graduated, but that doesn't mean he didn't get an education. By 1991, Assange hacked into the Pentagon, U.S. Navy, and other branches of the U.S. government. In 1996, he was caught by the Australian Federal Police and charged with over 30 counts of hacking and computer-related crimes. He didn't get any jail time, but he was fined $2,100.
I think the first taste of what would come later was the hacking that he did as a young programmer, and that really sort of foreshadowed a healthy skepticism of the use and abuse of technology by governments.
That's Vernon Silver.
I'm a reporter for Bloomberg's investigations team.
Assange's youth as a hacker laid the foundation for him to start WikiLeaks in 2006. But what is WikiLeaks? It's a website that posts unfiltered, usually classified documents. What separates it from every other media outlet is that they have no editorial hierarchy. With a publication like the New York Times, information comes in, they take that information, package it, then disseminate it for the public to see. WikiLeaks, however, cuts out the middleman.
WikiLeaks gathers information, most of it given to them anonymously. So what they're doing is really very simple. They get the information in one end from who gives it to them and out the other with sometimes minimal interference. Julian Assange is the leader of that, the mastermind, the creator, and really, because he thinks of it as a journalistic enterprise, the editor-in-chief.
But every story starts with a source, and Assange has some unconventional sources.
Julian Assange does not hack as far as we know. He is the recipient of people who are either insiders who give him secret documents or hacked emails from a foreign power.
That's Eli Lake.
I am a columnist for Bloomberg.
And there was no source bigger for Assange than Chelsea Manning. He used to be known as U.S. soldier Bradley Manning. In 2010, Manning provided Assange and WikiLeaks with hundreds of thousands of leaked government documents. WikiLeaks quietly began releasing the documents in February of 2010. Then made big headlines in April by posting what is now known as the collateral murder video.
Come on, fire!
It was a vivid, graphic video. It changed the debate on the Iraq War, and importantly, it put WikiLeaks on the map when they put it online, and they couldn't be ignored at that point.
And those leaks were just the beginning. They went on to post more than 90,000 leaked documents known as the Afghan war logs, 390,000 documents known as the Iraq war logs, and 250,000 private messages between diplomats called cables in what is now known as Cablegate. These leaks were met with very real ethical questions.
The problem with publishing those cables was that a number of confidential sources for U.S. diplomats who faced real danger when their names were exposed.
Then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton drove the point home that
every country, including the United States, must be able to have candid conversations about the people and nations with whom they deal.
Shortly after Cablegate, the Swedish government issued an arrest warrant for Assange on allegations of rape and molestation. He claimed the allegations were fabricated to get him extradited to the United States, a claim the U.S. government denied. Either way, Assange's next move was
to seek refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy, which really was the beginning of the new chapter in his life and what we're dealing with now, which is him being stuck in London.
What was supposed to be an office in an embassy is now Assange's self-imposed prison to this very day. But that doesn't mean he's slowed down. Since being trapped in the embassy, WikiLeaks has released files about Guantanamo Bay prisoners, Syrian political figures, and the draft to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And then came the 2016 U.S. election.
Thousands of leaked emails showed Democratic Party officials possibly plotting against Bernie Sanders in his race against Hillary Clinton.
Over the course of 68 days, WikiLeaks released 20,000 confidential Democratic National Committee emails. In terms of the presidential race, if you look right here, when Assange released the first batch of emails, Trump actually takes his first lead against Clinton.
I think we've had enough of the Clintons, in all fairness. Don't you think?
Once WikiLeaks started exposing secrets of the Democratic Party, Julian Assange became a hero to many on the right. Public opinion kind of flip-flopped.
WikiLeaks!
From the emails, we now know Hillary Clinton's campaign manager makes risotto, and also how the DNC squashed Bernie Sanders' campaign. One thing we don't know is who gave Assange the stolen emails in the first place.
Many leading Democrats say they suspect it was the Russians. They released an analysis from a private cybersecurity firm that had said it was the Russians.
But Assange claims,
our source is not the Russian government, and it is not a state party.
So this is where we stand today. The public still doesn't know who provided the emails to WikiLeaks. Meanwhile, Assange is still running WikiLeaks and still releasing documents. In March 2017, he started publishing documents from the CIA's Center for Cyber Intelligence called Vault 7.
The CIA, the agency charged with finding and keeping our top secrets, can't keep its own secrets.
As long as Assange has a connection to the world, no government secret will be too far from exposure.
Julian Assange is still in the embassy. Maybe he'll leave, maybe he won't. Kind of regardless, his work has been done. He's changed the way people think about their governments, about their own secrets, about their own hackability, and really the world has changed because of him.
I'm about to expose everything you won't admit. And action! This entire video is based on a true story. When I do like motivational speeches or even tell myself like, love yourself and you should love yourself.
This is Lily Singh, but to fans all over the world, she's the YouTube star Superwoman.
What up, everyone? It's your girl, Superwoman. I know we can change the world for the better, one positive day at a time. My parents now know what I do. They didn't know what I did for a long time in the beginning of my career. I was just making videos in my room. They had no idea. Mom, Dad, have you seen my keys? I can't find them anywhere. Because you're always on phone. Until someone called them, like a family member from another part of Canada was like, Canada, is your daughter making videos? And the mom was like, I don't know, Lily, are you making videos?
Just making videos grew into an entire career. Today, Lily's YouTube channel has some 12 million subscribers, over 2 billion views, and guest stars like Michelle Obama, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, and Seth Rogen.
I think a lot of young girls are raised to believe that you're going to go to school and then graduate and then get married and then get a job and have kids.
And Lily was on that path, all the way through a psychology degree at York University in Toronto. But when she started thinking about a career,
I started to immensely panic and think something was wrong with me because I tried to figure out my life and it wasn't working in that straight line.
It was 2010 and YouTube was only 5 years old.
I thought nothing of YouTube. I was probably the last person in my circle of friends to discover YouTube. And I remember when I did, I thought, this is so strange. There's people making videos in their rooms and other people are watching them.
So she figured, why not give it a shot?
I one day posted a video because I was sad and I wanted to be creative and happy.
She didn't know how to edit video or write scripts, so she winged it.
It was so bad and so cringe, and my expectation was literally nothing. I was like, I'm gonna put this video up, a couple of my friends are gonna watch it, probably make fun of me, and that's gonna be the end of this. The second and third video came from, wait, 70 people watched my first one, can I get 80 to watch the next one?
She kept creating, she kept posting, and the viewers kept coming. Lily had found an audience.
A lot of the comments were, oh my God, there's a brown girl on YouTube.
More specifically, India. Lily's parents immigrated to Canada from India, and Lily was born and raised in Scarborough, near Toronto.
My home life was awesome. My parents, even though I portrayed them to be quite strict in my videos.
Oh, Lily, where the rest of your skirt, huh? I teach you like this to walk around like this, showing everything to everyone?
They actually aren't like that at all. They're pretty modern and pretty cool.
Your dress is short. Don't know what for.
And were pretty lenient with me. I mean, I got away with a lot of things. I was a brat. I was a brat.
She had a different idea of what she wanted out of life than other kids. In a grade school graduation slideshow, her classmates said they wanted to be lawyers and doctors.
And then I came up and I was like, rapper.
Making out with your friends, man. But then you say that you hate hoes.
I could just feel my parents being like, why?
Because that's just not something women really did in the Singh family.
I know there was a ton of people that weren't happy about my birth being a female, so I think, and that's some real-ish, but it's a real thing. The best thing I could have done to prove to so many people that didn't want my mom to have a daughter was to become Superwoman.
What up, everyone? It's your girl, Superwoman.
It was the name of Lily's favorite hip-hop song by Lil Mo featuring Fabulous.
I love the song so much because it was one of the only songs at the time that was an empowering female song, where Lil Mo's going on about like, I will save guys with my superpowers, and I will save girls with my superpowers, and I am the Superwoman. I thought, this name that I've had for so long that empowered me when I was younger, I'm gonna make this my screen name. Maybe this should be a new series.
Superwoman didn't just burst onto the scene overnight with a viral video. It was a steady climb fueled by hard work.
The moment that I thought this is going somewhere and this could be a career was the first time I performed internationally. It was in India. And it was the first time where I was truly across the world and people knew my videos.
Singh has transformed herself from a bratty kid to an internet personality to a media mogul. She starred in a feature film, A Trip to Unicorn Island, in 2016. And her book, How to Be a Boss, hit the New York Times bestseller list in 2017 while she was on a 30-city international tour. Lily started out with the goal of getting millions of subscribers and financial security.
Hurry the hell up!
But after surpassing those goals, success has new meaning.
I've really come to terms with the fact that my definition of success is what's the best legacy I can leave behind. And it's not the number of views, the number of subscribers. It is the number of people that can say, this girl changed my life or changed something in my life positively.
CTE is often found in the brains of deceased athletes, military veterans, and others with a history of repetitive brain trauma. Hundreds have donated their brains to the VA Boston University Concussion Legacy Foundation Brain Bank.
This is a former NFL player who died in his early 70s, and this is a veteran who also died in his early 70s.
Dr. Ann McKee dissects these brains.
The hippocampus and the mammillary bodies are very important for memory. I can see that they're slightly affected.
McKee recently dissected the brain of former New England Patriots player Aaron Hernandez, who was convicted of murder and later committed suicide.
You'll see right away that the brain is showing signs of shrinkage. You can see the crevices in the brain that you can't see in the normal.
McKee says Hernandez's severe case of CTE impacted his decision-making, depression, and ability to control rage and aggression. Right now, she thinks we're underestimating how many people have CTE.
We were able to distinguish between CTE and controls and CTE and Alzheimer's disease. The next question is, can we do this in the blood, and can we do this in living people? And we aren't there yet with those answers.
But the need for a diagnosis in the living is motivating companies such as Quanterix in Lexington, Massachusetts, to work faster on technology that could diagnose concussions and CTE in as few as 30 minutes. Kevin Rosovsky is the CEO.
It's like a high-powered microscope, and so by doing that, we can see little biomarkers that you couldn't see before in the blood.
Quanterix received a grant from the NFL and just went public. Since then, its stock is up more than 40%. The company sells a machine called Simoa for $175,000 to other biotechs, hospitals, and researchers.
And for the first time in history, we're able to see brain health in blood, and that's a major breakthrough, and that's leading to less invasive testing, and we've already been able to see evidence of concussions, and there's the beginning evidence of being able to see the accumulated effect of concussions.
Quanterix is also trying to detect Alzheimer's disease, multiple sclerosis, and ALS. Rosovsky says he thinks diagnosing concussions will be easier than diagnosing CTE.
Diagnosing CT in the living probably is a couple years away. We're real excited to see the progress, but reducing some of that work into actual tests in the laboratory takes time. There's regulatory approvals, there's a lot of red tape that you have to go through.
Also in this race to diagnose CTE in the blood are Athlon Medical and Exosome Sciences. And New York's Mount Sinai Hospital is scanning for the disease in the living. But it's just one step in a series of questions for those with serious head trauma. There's still no cure for CTE.
Even if we had a great idea for a treatment, there's no way to test whether it's effective or not. So that's the enormous advance that we'll get if we can develop a biomarker for this disease.
In Boston, Ann Mostu, Bloomberg News.
Wine is a $300 billion global industry where one person's opinion can make fortunes or break them. That's because of this man, Robert Parker, and his newsletter, The Wine Advocate. For 3 decades, he dominated as the world's most influential wine critic. Now Parker's protege is building an empire of his own. Antonio Galloni runs Venice.
Antonio, tell me, what are you trying to build at Venice?
Well, at Venice, we started with the idea in 2013 of building a world-class platform. We have a database of about 250,000 professionally written reviews. On Delectable, we have 7 million user reviews. Through Delectable, we also have a partnership with Whole Foods and several other partnerships that we can't announce just yet. And when you put that all together, what we have is something that no other company in our space can even come close to.
Do you think of yourself as the next Parker?
Not at all.
Why?
Because Steve Jobs said you can't live your life trying to be somebody else. So he's one of my biggest influences, and I've never wanted to be a replica of somebody else because a replica is never as good as the original. Bob is a genius, fantastic, one of a kind. We're going to be something completely different, and I have no desire to be some version of somebody else.
Different in what way?
Every decision that I've made at this company is completely anathemic to what Bob did with his company. I want our writers to be partners. All of my senior people are locked into the company. They all have equity or they have a path to equity based on business results. That's something that we never had at Parker. Our benefits are world-class, and everything that we've done at Venice is completely different from that model. When Steve Tanzer, who is the most experienced active wine critic in America, wants to work with us, that says something. When Alessandro Masnaghetti, who's the best cartographer of vineyards, wants to work with us, that says something. When Neil Martin, who's a superstar wine critic with enormous experience in Bordeaux and Burgundy and the former lead critic at The Advocate, wants to come and be part of our team, that says something.
You make it sound like The Wine Advocate was a disaster as a company and a miserable experience as an employee.
No, it was great because I got to work with Bob Parker when he was at his prime. You know, and Bob was like a second father to me, and we talked on the phone all the time, and he gave me great advice.
Can anyone's palate dominate the wine criticism business the way Parker's did? And should anyone's palate dominate it the way his did?
I just think the world is very different today. You know, I mean, it's just a totally different world. It's probably not healthy to have a single person dominating the world.
It's not even wine criticism, it's the wine industry.
Yeah, that's probably not the healthiest thing in the world. But I think that there's just such an opportunity right now with social media and technology to reach such a massive number of people that I think it's possible that 1 or 2 people will actually have more influence than Bob Parker did. Because they will, again, this goes back to your first question, not trying to be a version of somebody else. You see this in sports all the time. It's like, oh, well, nobody will ever beat this record. And then somebody comes along. You know, it's like tennis, Pete Sampras. Nobody's ever going to win as many Grand Slams. Now you have 2 guys who are ahead of that and 1 knocking on the door. And so I think a lot like that.
You're a former investment banker. How does that inform and influence what you're doing and what you've done?
My generation has had to deal with a lot more challenges. That's why I think we're actually much better poised for the future. My first job in finance, the first thing that happened was long-term capital, 1998. Then the tech bubble melted down. Then there was a mutual fund trading scandal. You know, that was all like within about 5 or 6 years. And these are the things that I had to deal with as a young executive. My peers who were 20 years older didn't know how to manage in crisis. They'd only seen Black Monday. They'd just been in a big bull market. It's very different. So I'm very lucky. People of my generation or a little bit younger have actually had to deal with a lot more crises. I think that's actually good for learning how to cope with challenges in business.
From the outside, it kind of looks like you're trying to demolish the house that Parker built, right? You left the Wine Advocate.
Yeah.
You merged with one of his chief rivals.
Yeah.
And you just hired his successor, Neil Martin.
Mm-hmm.
So are you?
I think what that says is that all the best people want to work at our company. And that's really what we strive to create starting in 2013. We wanted to create a world-class company that would attract the best-in-class talent, and not just on the content side, on the technology side, on the digital side, our office, and at every level, what we're trying to, we only hire superstars, and we're looking for those superstars.
In the world of professional wrestling, there's something called a swerve.
Hulk Hogan has betrayed WCW.
Some examples. These tag team partners are called babyfaces, or the good guys. Then one of them swerves when he super kicks his tag team partner in the head, quickly assuming the role of the bad guy, or what the wrestling world calls the heel.
Are you kidding? What a despicable act that was!
Or a match is almost lost when, what's that? The superstar wrestler appears out of nowhere sprinting down the aisle to save the match.
That's the Warriors music! That's the Ultimate Warrior!
That's a swerve. So it should go as no surprise that World Wrestling Entertainment, known as the WWE, the most popular brand of sports entertainment in the world, is prepared for any swerves that come their way. So here's the story of how the WWE learned to see the swerve coming. So I spoke to Bloomberg reporters Felix Gillette.
I'm a writer for Bloomberg News for the global business team.
And Kim Basine.
And I'm the U.S. luxury reporter at Bloomberg.
To find out exactly how the WWE is positioning itself for an all-out global invasion, which starts with a massive change to their lucrative pay-per-view model.
WWE basically pioneered the pay-per-view model on cable. I remember as a kid, when the pay-per-view events came up, all of our friends would scramble around and try and get one of the parents to pay for it.
But in 2014, they took a huge risk.
They saw a little bit sooner than some of the other entertainment brands that where this whole thing was moving was away from cable and satellite television and towards on-demand streaming video apps. They made this risky decision, in essence cannibalizing that pay-per-view model, which they had essentially built.
And after some early turbulence, it's working. Roughly 1.5 million people are paying $9.99 a month for the WWE app, making it the 5th most popular streaming OTT service. This adapt-or-die approach is in the WWE's DNA. Over the past 30 years, the company always seems to think 2 steps ahead. In the early 90s,
WWE was at its most threatened when Ted Turner took them on with WCW,
which stands for World Championship Wrestling. And back then, the WCW was winning the ratings war. So in order to compete with them,
WWE had changed its product from a family-friendly kind of cartoonish style to this really raw. That's why they called their show Raw. It was this raw style of wrestling.
With violent, outrageous, reality-inspired plot lines and aggressive personas.
From a 16-foot ladder!
And they won that fight against Ted Turner, and they bought WCW.
The early 2000s ushered in an era of testosterone-driven programming aimed at the red-blooded American male.
Bra and panties matches, and people smash each other over their head with like barbed wire bats and things like that.
Until 2015, when WWE fans started a hashtag #GiveDivas a Chance. Since then, WWE has hired 40 more female wrestlers, and that growing cast of female characters was part of a much larger plan.
They started to try to appeal to a broader set of people.
Let's attract more female fans. And after we've attracted more female fans, let's attract more international fans. They're broadening their base, and they're doing that in large part to make it more advertising friendly.
And not just friendly to advertisers.
They're trying to build up their fan base in China. They're trying to build up their fan base in Europe. They, already have a pretty good fan base in India.
India is a place where they already have an established wrestling culture.
Because of the gigantic Indian wrestler, the Great Khali. But there's still a lot of work to do. While the WWE set a revenue record in 2017, only 30% of it is coming from an overseas audience. And there's one person whose responsibility is to grow that number.
The buck eventually stops at Vince McMahon, no matter what's happening within WWE.
Yeah, he's a very controlling guy, and it's a very, very, very tightly scripted company.
And that goes all the way down the board to big stars' entrance music. And their outfits and things like that.
So with a CEO like McMahon always planning 2 moves ahead and an aggressive push into multiple international markets, a big issue is money.
It's hard to do all those things simultaneously without committing a huge amount of capital to it.
And that's where the WWE becomes an attractive company for buyers.
Potentially, one thing that could happen with WWE is they could benefit by being acquired by a bigger technology or telecom company, an Amazon or Facebook or a 21st Century Fox.
So with a market cap of $2.8 billion, the advantage of owning 100% of their own content, and a rapid consolidation spreading throughout the entertainment industry, it looks like the WWE is well positioned, even if there are swerves.
Lara, thank you very much for coming here.
Thanks for having me.
I've always been relieved ever since you were appointed, because at least until your appointment, I seem to have the most unpronounceable name. But now we will keep it as Dara and John. This conference is called The Year Ahead, but in your case, you are close to 6 months into the job. And I wondered what you saw in terms of the year ahead at Uber as your biggest challenge. What's the thing that you think about most when it comes to 2018?
We definitely have our share of challenges at Uber. And for me, where I want to get Uber to the year ahead is a year of normalcy. 2017 was, I think, will go down as one of the most difficult years for any company out there. And I have to give credit to the Uber team and the employees there. It is a group of true believers who believe in our mission, who believe in mobility as a service being available to consumers everywhere at a reasonable cost. And what my job in 2018 is to get rid of the distractions and get the company back to business. business, get the company back to normalcy. There's a lot that we've done in the past 6 months as far as bringing new investors, driving a new culture and norms where doing the right thing, period, comes first, bringing a new management team, et cetera. There's a lot that we've gotten done, but this is a company that knows how to execute. This is a service. Mobility as a service is something that's universal, that's needed in the world, and I just want to get back to doing business.
It's quite interesting. You said true believers. Yeah. Normally, true believers are the last possible people where you're able to change a culture. Can you explain a bit about that?
Well, I think that they understand that mobility as a service, bringing the cost of transportation down, making transportation services available to anyone and everyone on a local basis, and partnering with cities to be a solution to traffic, to pollution, et cetera. That is a mission that they all believe in. And I think that they, having seen what happened in 2017, to some extent the crisis, the enormous crisis that the company has gone through, is a benefit because everybody at the company knows now that we need to change, that we need to break with the past as far as the way the company was run. We need to go from growth at any cost to responsible growth and growth in partnership with other players out there. That's clear, but now I've got to kind of get the company down to the normalcy of execution, of building great technology, and I think we're going to get there. It's still some tough sledding early on, but I absolutely think we're going to get there.
When you talk about execution, is profits one of the things you want to get? I think you lost $4 billion last year.
Well, peanuts
by the standards of...
Profits would help. So at some point, we absolutely have to become profitable, and that's part of the plan.
But do you have a kind of goal for that? Do you think you should be profitable by 2022 or by 2020?
I think that we'll be profitable before 2022. This is the business itself.
Do you want to come back a bit closer, 2020?
Yeah, listen, it's not going to, I don't want to name a specific year, but this is a business that the core business, the ride-sharing business, can be profitable within 3 years. We will continue to make very aggressive investments in building out autonomy because we think that's a terrific opportunity for building out new technologies such as Uber Elevate, where near-term profitability is not a goal, but long-term growth is. So we will look to balance near-term profitability, but as a company, we will always be a company that makes big, bold bets and takes big risks.
To what extent, though, do you think that drive to become profitable fights against a little bit of this culture change? If you want to make, you talked about making money, but not at all costs. Do those two things?
Well, I don't think that profitability and culture are their issue. It's the company in the past was willing to make trade-offs as it related to how it did business, and I think was guilty of hubris, was guilty of thinking that they knew better than others, and I think that what we know now clearly is that breakneck growth can hide cultural issues, that there are no excuses for not doing the right thing, and that you do have to make trade-offs. And as a management team, we're specifically talking about those trade-offs that you have to make. We have to be a little more patient sometimes because working with governments, regulators, et cetera, sometimes takes longer, but in the end, you build a more lasting business. And so maybe what we went through was necessary, but we're here. We can control our actions from this moment onwards, and I think everyone at Uber from this moment onwards wants to build a great company, not only in terms of growth, but in terms of the kind of company anyone would want to work at.
Can I ask you one thing which you have got as sort of hangover from last year, which is all the regulatory problems, and particularly all the cases against you? I think there are 6 criminal probes or whatever going on.
The lawyers are lining up outside the door.
Which one do you sort of think? Which one do you fear most? I suppose out of different things.
Listen, I think that all of them are serious issues, and my response is that we're going to be transparent and we're going to take responsibility for our actions in the past. I do think that there are certain circumstances where there was smoke but no fire. And I think as a company, we have to defend ourselves and work within kind of the appropriate frameworks. And my goal is just to get beyond this stuff.
But some of these things like pricing policies, surely they go right to the heart of what Uber is, or am I wrong about that?
Yeah, I think they do, but I think that there's a way of being smart but transparent at the same time, and that's where we've got to take the company.
Take me through governments. When you talk to governments privately, do they talk any differently than they do publicly?
Governments?
Yes, governments.
I think that they are honestly a bit relieved with how we are engaging with them, because I think that the engagement is now real. I think they feel like we're out there, we're genuine because we've learned our lessons of the past, and I do think that we can take, for example, the data that we have in terms of traffic and in terms of movement of our drivers and riders, and we can use that data to partner up with cities in order to solve congestion issues, because congestion doesn't help anyone. It wastes enormous amounts of time for consumers. It hurts the environment. And I think that we are aligned with cities, for example, to partner with them in a fundamental way to solve these problems. And I do think that when these are conversations that a number of regulators and cities have wanted to have with us for many years, and I think we are really engaging with them at a depth that I think is going to create a real win-win going forward.
Do you think you were too confrontational on this before?
Yeah, I do. I think that the company was pushing growth. And listen, any innovator, to some extent, the innovation is about questioning past kind of present practices. It's about breaking things, the Facebook breaking things. We just went a step and a half too far. And what I want to keep, hopefully, is the best of both worlds, which is this spirit of innovation, the spirit of can-do, et cetera, but the responsibility of partnership. We don't know better than you. We're actually going to work with you, of actually having dialogue and respect for our city partners, for regulators, and then continuing to take risks and continuing to do daring things. And I think we can accomplish that.
Imagine this audience here is a collection of mayors or a collection of city officials, and you want to depict, this is the Year Ahead conference, depict what the years ahead in this thing are going to be like. How far is driverless cars going to go? You talked just a few days ago about the idea of there being flying cars in 10 years' time. Can you just give a description of what you think transport is going to look like?
Well, I think that we think there are three keys to transport and where the industry is going: autonomous, electric, and shared. And I think all three are necessary in order to get to the next level of city planning, et cetera. There are many cities where up to a fifth of the space taken in these cities is taken by parking and storing these cars. And so I do think that you need autonomous, you need electric, and you need shared. And I do think it's going to take some time. True autonomy for every single use case is some ways away. What we bring to bear is our developing autonomy, and we will have autonomous cars on the road, I believe, within the next 18 months, not as a kind of a test case, but as a real case out there. And over a period of time, we're going to bring autonomous transportation and feather it in with the non-autonomous transportation with drivers.
What does feathering in mean?
Feathering
mean to a layman like me? Crashing.
Yeah, feathering in means if you're, for example, in Phoenix, and you make a request to go from A to B, which is what you do with Uber, there will be 95% of cases where we may not have everything mapped perfectly, or the weather may not be the right weather, or there may be an accident on the road, or you may not have 2 or 3 ways of getting from A to B, where you may say, you know what, that's not an autonomous use case. We're going to send a driver to pick that person up. For 5% of cases, everything is going to fall into place. And we will send an autonomous car. The user will be able to pick, do you want, there's an autonomous car, yes or no? And we'll be able to service that A for B. That 5% is going to go to 10 and 15 and 20 as our computers and our algorithms learn more and more about what it takes to drive in a city in a real life situation. And every minute of every day, that driver, that computer is going to get better and know Phoenix better and better and better. And in 5 years, we'll have the perfect driver in Phoenix. We will have to retrain that driver in every single city. We're going to have to build out 3D maps of these cities. And it will take time, but over a period of time, you essentially have a driver who becomes the perfect driver. It'll take 10 to 15 years, but that's the feathering in that I'm talking about.
And will a child born today, will they ever need to learn how to drive?
A child born today? No, I don't think so.
So within sort of 20 years from now, we will...
I don't think so. Listen, I hear some groans.
And also,
I heard a couple of groans. 1.3 million people die from car crashes every year. 1.3 million people die from car crashes every year. That doesn't count an estimated 20 to 50 million people that are injured. Okay, this is actually a public safety issue. If you look at cars, 96% of cars, 96% of time, cars are sitting there not being used. It is a huge amount of pollution that's caused by these cars being in the road, and a huge amount of wasted time. So the safety is there. Electrification is absolutely key, and sharing these platforms is going to allow us to be much safer and also put our assets where they add value.
But it's quite interesting because when you first came in, I remember you sounding somewhat more skeptical about self-driving cars. You've been converted. Is that a?
The choir has spoken, and I'm listening. It's pretty exciting technology out there. But again, it will be a hybrid technology for some period of time.
What about flying cars? That came as a slight surprise.
Yes, that's a great project that we're working on. It's called Uber Elevate. And it is actually about battery technology.
It would have helped a lot of people here.
I know. I wish that I was available. We'll launch it here if we can. But battery technology is allowing us to have multiple rotors on planes, or helicopters, if you want to call them that. These rotors that are much smaller will be much quieter than helicopters are. Much quieter, much safer. If you add sharing into the equation, you can actually get the economics of going from A to B. We think within 5 to 7 years to a place where normal people would think about taking these flying cars. That'll be the beginning, and then it's about scaling. And we're working with a number of partners right now.
Do you think the regulation on flying cars, I've heard some proponents of it argue that it might be easier than it has been on driverless cars, because driverless cars you have to deal with existing roads, existing everything. Flying cars, essentially you're going into unconquered space.
I think that mayors that are forward-thinking understand that traffic and pollution are a real issue, and I think flying cars can be a significant solution to traffic issues in cities. And these cars, to start with, they're going to be very specific. They'll be kind of highways in the air. There'll be very specific routes that these flying cars go on. They're not going to be able to take you to your backyard and land in your backyard. There'll be these skyports. So there'll be very specific routes that you go on. And I think if you build a regulatory framework that has that kind of structure around it, I think you get to a better solve.
Can I drag you back somewhat reluctantly back to the real world? But you have Rajiv Misra, who came in with you from SoftBank.
Yes.
He's going to become a director. Last week he said that Uber should focus on repairing its market share in the US and on key European markets rather than going going to new ones. Do you agree with that? Is that the way you look at Uber?
I think one of the fundamental strengths of Uber is the global scope that we have. This is
you
a
had that
brand.
motto, everywhere. What's it? Everywhere for everyone.
Yeah, everywhere for everyone.
Do you want to make it some places for some people?
No, we like the everywhere for everyone. It's much sexier than some places for some people. That's
telling me.
Just not interesting. I do think seriously though the global scope that our company brings is important. Our being able to build technology that we can amortize essentially everywhere in the world is hard, but it is part of the fundamental value that we introduce. So I would look at Uber very much as a global brand. That said, we're going to look at all opportunities, but at this point we are leaning forward, and 2018 for us is going to be very much a lean forward year for the company.
But without, I'm not trying to create new boardroom tension at Uber, but that would appear that SoftBank is keener on a more limited idea, whilst you're keener on everywhere for everyone.
Well, listen, SoftBank is a very important shareholder. They're our largest shareholder, and many of our shareholders have opinions over what's the right thing to do. Ultimately, the governance of the company is going to be at the board, and we'll have those discussions at the board, and we'll set our long-term strategy, and then execute on it.
One of the things which Uber played, perhaps not very fortunately, a role in was the whole sexual harassment questions and everything to do with that. I suppose one very obvious question: do you think that you have solved that part of the culture? But secondly, do you think that is this is a real revolution and it's going to stick?
I think that what was happening at Uber was serious, and I think that while what Uber went through was difficult, I think the Susan Fowler blog was probably one of the best things that happened for Uber, and it certainly started a movement that's an incredibly important movement at the company. I'd be reticent to say that it's solved.
Yeah.
But it's not an endemic issue within the culture of the company, and I think the company has learned, and I think the company took very harsh and appropriate steps to make sure that kind of behavior is absolutely clear, that kind of behavior is not accepted in any way, shape, or form of the company, regardless of where you are, regardless of if you're a great performer or not. So I think we're at the right place for Uber as a company, but I think in general, we're not where we need to be in terms of women in senior positions, making sure that we're welcoming of women in technology, and we help women really build their careers within our company. There's a great kind of bottoms-up energy there, but we're not where we need to be, and we have a lot of work ahead of us.
On the issue of, you talked about the top performers, is that looking back, and also I suppose looking forward for many of the people in this room, because there are a lot of people's businesses which have been affected by this. If you had to give lessons to other people who are now looking at this issue, perhaps more seriously than they have done before, is the really bad issue, and I suppose I'm thinking some ways about the media industry in this, is that giving top performers more room for maneuver or whatever than people, or more discretion than people thought? Is that top performers need to be treated the same as everybody else?
I think they absolutely need to be held accountable. One of the really valuable lessons that I got early in my life was actually through Jack Welch, and he said, it's very tempting to allow top performers to misbehave in any way, but for me, he was talking about being aligned with the CEO. Sometimes you allow top performers, the tendency is, well, let them get away with some kind of behavior that is not the right behavior because they're so good. And what Jack told me very early on is that it's the top performers who are problematic culturally that are the most dangerous, because they have followership within the company, because people look up to them. So he's like the dumb person who is bad culturally. He's not the problem, because everyone says, well, that's a dumb person, so who cares? It's the smart person who has followership. So it is incredibly important for the top performers to actually be held to account more radically than anyone else, because they're the ones who have followership at the company, and they have to set the example. So for me personally, that has absolutely guided how I've managed. Expedia was a company that had, excellent cultural values. And one of the first things we did at Uber was to go out and reset our cultural values, and we call them norms, because to me, it's not just these values that you put on the wall and kind of people stare at and you know, it's all nice. It's about behavior. And we set out to change behavior at Uber, and I think that the company was thirsting for it, and we are starting on a path, and I believe it's going to be a positive path.
An inevitable question, I hope you won't regard it as a cheap shot, but you talked about smart people who have followers throughout a company. I mean, Travis would seem to be the epitome of that sort of figure. Is that, do you think of him as being in that category of people that Jack Welch was talking about?
I think, listen, Travis was the CEO of the company, and he had incredible followership, and he was held to account, right? I mean, he's no longer the CEO of the company, and he's a board member. He's a big investor. And so he's absolutely going to play a part on the board. But we've also been very clear as a company that we do have to make a break with the past, with how we behaved as a company, and to some extent with the new CEO being a very different kind of a CEO. So in the end, you have to be held accountable, and I think that Travis was held accountable, and at this point, he's a board member and a constructive one at that.
If you look around the world now, where do you see the next competitors to Uber? You've obviously got Lyft breathing down your neck.
Yes, yes.
Where else do they come from?
Well, I think that as you move into a world of autonomy, the position of the car manufacturers, the position of, for example, Google, who's developing Waymo and Waymo autonomous technology, you're going to get a lot of players interested in the space. And a lot of people think about Uber and ride sharing as a significant enterprise, and it is. But the fact is that we account for less than 1% of miles driven on the road now. When autonomy comes in, that number over the next 10 years is going to be closer, I believe, to 15 to 20%. So because we're not yet a true alternative to car ownership, and I believe that as you bring autonomous and you bring the price of mobility down and make it available to everybody, everywhere, then we become a real alternative to car ownership, and that really opens up the market for us, but it also opens us up to many more competitors.
And is Google at the forefront of those competitors at the moment?
Google is one of many. I think that they've developed very strong autonomous technology. But what we think, which is exceptional, is having autonomous technology and the network under one roof, which allows us to use autonomous in a very practical way, nearer than you think.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Jason Kelly on Bloomberg Radio.
Live from New York and New Jersey, streaming on YouTube, it is Monday, June 1st, 2020, and safe to say, a somber day and weekend, a nation in crisis, and no, as you might guess, it is not about the virus. Of course, the death of George Floyd and subsequent protests and rising civil unrest around the nation, reminding us once again of the inequalities that exist in our society. And Jason, we're going to look at that through our Bloomberg lens over the next few hours.
Well, and we've all been riveted by the pictures from around the country, some in our backyard in many cases, and we know that it has affected individuals, we know it has affected companies, and we know it has ultimately an economic effect. And we also know that this is part of an underlying economic crisis that this country is facing and has been facing for some time. A lot of things coming together here. We are going to explore all of them with a whole host of experts from different walks of life. So looking forward to an interesting few hours as we keep an eye on a market that has largely shrugged a lot of this off. Let's get some of those numbers from Charlie Pellet. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much. Happy Monday to you both. Indeed, markets looking past a lot of what you're talking about. S&P up by 14 now at 3,058, a gain of 0.5%. The Dow's up 83. That is a gain of 0.3%. Nasdaq on this back to work Monday, up 70 points, higher by 0.7%. The 10-year down 5/32 with a yield of 0.66%. We've got gold up 0.4, 17.37 the ounce, and crude West Texas Intermediate down 1.2%, 35.08 a barrel. Again, recapping equities higher now, close to the best level with the S&P up 14, up 0.5%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, we'll obviously be keeping an eye on that trade amid everything else. And speaking of which, let's set the Business Week agenda because the markets remain front and center, we know, for our audience, and also as a gauge of where we are, both economically and what the reaction is to all of this that's going on around us. To help us do that, Gina Martin-Adams is, of course, Bloomberg Intelligence Chief Equity Strategist, and Dave Wilson, Bloomberg's Stocks Editor. They both join us from New Jersey. Dave, I want to start with you. Just give us the sense, as you look at the contours of this trade, what's driving us up here?
Well, it really looks, Jason, like a lot of the shares that have been beaten down over the past few months are kind of leading the way up here. I mean, you've got a perfect example in Coty. I mean, given that they've made a deal with KKR for their professional beauty business. We're talking about Clairol and Wella, those brands valued in the transaction at $4.3 billion. And Coty's shares are up almost 17%. It's the biggest gain in the S&P 500. And then you see the gap after that. I mean, talk about a stock that's been beaten up lately. You know, J.P. Morgan getting more positive on the company given the extent of the stock's decline, and it's up more than 12%. You know, you go down the list, you see some of the retailers, companies, real estate investment trusts that actually own the shopping centers.
Right.
You see, the cruise lines, the airlines to some extent, the hotels. I mean, those are the kind of stocks that are leading the way, as much as anything. I mean, tech shares aren't even keeping up with the S&P 500 at the moment.
Yeah. Gina, come on in on this. It's an interesting, I think we all thought, that because of some of the turmoil that we saw around the nation over the weekend, also China and U.S. tensions seem to be taking another step forward, China kind of kicking back here or pushing back. I think we thought that there'd be a little bit more nervousness in the markets. How do you see it today?
Well, what I see is a market that continues to broaden. It's a continuation of leadership into, as Dave mentioned, the beaten down names. That's really been going on since late March and has just continued to gather steam. Throughout the month of May, we saw this gather steam significantly. But a couple of really critical technical thresholds were reached last week that are just too tough for investors to continue to ignore. I mean, I think the first 2 months of this rally was a lot about, kind of taking a leap of faith, and there were still a lot of investors sitting on the sidelines sort of poo-pooing the rally as a bear market rally that'll eventually fade and turn over. But last week we crossed over the 200-day moving average for the first time. We got to the point where 90% of stocks in the index were trading above their 50-day moving average. These types of numbers just don't happen in bear market bounces. They usually signify the beginnings of a new uptrend and a recovery rally that tends to endure. So I think what you're seeing both last week and a continuation of today is really investors finally capitulating to the trend, rotating into where they see you have the greatest opportunity for continued advance, which many would say are the cyclical laggards, where you probably still have a little bit of room for catch-up, and generally starting to put a little bit of money to work in equities, despite the fact that they're kicking and screaming their way in.
Well, it's interesting, also kicking and screaming their way in is Goldman Sachs, which rolled back its pessimistic outlook for stocks, right? David Kostin was predicting the S&P would slump to the 2,400 level, so that was, 20% below the Friday close, and now they're saying, okay, yeah, we're going to, go all in like everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, these kind of things always worry me. When everybody starts to capitulate, then you want to start to get a little bit more cautious. And that is something that we're starting to do, actually. We put a report on the terminal this morning talking about, while we're very, very sort of soothed by the idea that finally we get to claim that this is a recovery rally with the technicals that have formed, We also typically find that market advances slow following those technical measures reached. So our view is that we head into a choppier market over the summer. We start to really question our economic outlook. We've seen a lot of re-rating on policy and optimism that, policy will sort of swoop in and provide enough cover for us to get through this. Now I think we get into more of a show-me market, and we start to see, really focus on that economic and earnings data a little bit more for signs of recovery emerging.
Yeah, those next earnings reports are going to be fascinating to look at. All right, Gina Martin-Adams, thank you so much. Bloomberg Intelligence Chief Equity Strategist Dave Wilson, before you go, give us a preview of the chart.
Well, if you think we were in a bear market for just 5 weeks in U.S. stocks, you look beyond the S&P 500 and you see an indication that it went on much longer and cut much deeper than just looking at that one index would suggest.
Interesting. All right. That's coming up at 3:30 Wall Street time. Dave Wilson, our stocks editor. All right. Well, coming up, as we alluded to at the top of the show, Carol, we are going to look at what's going on right now through all our Bloomberg lenses. And we've got experts from across the board, whether it's sports or business, entertainment, so many different elements here.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to be talking with John Hope Bryant, CEO of Operation Hope, PwC Chair Tim Ryan. He's been talking with a lot of CEOs, so we'll see what he has to say. He's been talking to them, obviously, about the impact of the virus, but, what's happened over the last week in Minneapolis has certainly brought a lot of concern and, stress among corporations and certainly for their employees. So we'll talk to him about that. And then Candace Lee, she's the first African-American woman to lead an SEC athletic department. She's just been named the first female athletic director at Vanderbilt. So totally interested in talking to her about her tenure. She was an athlete. She's been very involved at Vanderbilt in terms of their sports programs, but now she's in charge of it all. So on this day when we're talking so much about, of course, Minneapolis, inequalities, George Floyd, I'm curious to see what she has to say about that as well.
Absolutely. Looking forward to that. We're also going to get into the business of live music later on. And also, we can't forget, and you alluded to this with Gina, some of the big stories. China obviously continues to dominate headlines. We're going to get into that as well. And let's not forget, we're in a global health crisis, folks. And we're going to catch up with this CEO of Providence Health out on the West Coast. In the meantime, let's do the Bloomberg Business Week Bite of the Day. It's one number that tells us a lot. Today's number is $2 trillion, Carol.
It is indeed, Jason. Apple is on track for a market capitalization of $2 trillion over the next 4 years. This is according to analysts over at Evercore ISI. They see a combination of earnings growth and a boost from the services and wearable businesses, helping Apple become the first company of that value. It's just kind of mind-blowing. Evercore's analyst sees Apple shares reaching $550 in an upside scenario driven by gross margin expansion. The market cap currently, Jason, around $1.4 trillion, just below Microsoft's, which is at 1.39. Apple's at 1.38, let's be exact. And Amazon right now at 1.22 trillion. I mean, it's just a different era when it comes to market caps.
Yeah, that's trillion with a T.
Yeah.
People, that's amazing. All right, let's get to Mark Mills now. He's got some world and national headlines. Hey, Mark.
Jason, Carol, thanks. President Donald Trump urged states to crack down on nationwide protests in the aftermath of the death of a black man at the hands of police in Minneapolis. You have to dominate, Trump said Monday in a video conference with governors and law enforcement. If you don't dominate, you're wasting your time. They're going to run over you, and you're going to look like a bunch of jerks. You have to dominate, and you have to arrest people, and you have to try people, said Trump. Bloomberg News obtained an audio recording of Trump's comments. Black pastors and politicians challenged Joe Biden on Monday to outline what he would do as president to improve access to economic opportunity and overhaul the criminal justice system as violent protests sweep the country. The American astronauts aboard the International Space Station held a news conference before beginning their scientific assignments. Bloomberg's Irv Chapman reports from Washington.
Astronaut Chris Cassidy, who's been on the space station since early April, described the arrival of his two colleagues.
They're going 17,500 miles an hour, and we're going 17,500 miles an hour. And we are bringing these two vehicles together with a computer and them backing it up, and I could monitor this process on the telemetry. I was pretty amazed at the whole thing.
Astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley said their first chore was to check out the capsule that brought them, that would eventually bring them home, and would be their emergency escape vehicle if needed. In Washington, Irv Chapman, Bloomberg Radio.
Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Mark Mills. Carol and Jason, back to you.
All right, Mark, thank you so much. Well, as we know, we talked a little bit about so much going on, certainly on this Monday, but we cannot forget that we are still in a global pandemic, global deaths exceeding 372,000. Lots going on. So let's get an update. Let's head back to one of our top voices when it comes to what's going on in the virus. That's Dr. Rod Hochman. He's president and CEO of Providence Health. Of course, we've talked to them before, and him specifically, the massive health system that's out there on the West Coast. Dr. Hochman joining us on the phone once again from Seattle, Washington. Dr. Hochman, nice to have you back with us. Tell us a little bit about what you're seeing at this point and what it tells you about kind of where we are as a country when it comes to the virus, getting control of the virus, and maybe what it helps tell us about what the next few months look like.
Sure. I think as all physicians and all people in healthcare, besides the tragic events of the weekend and all of that, we're holding our breath, watching all of these people in close quarters, thinking about what's going to happen 2 weeks from now. And, because we look at it from a clinical standpoint as well as from an emotional standpoint, we understand, but wow. We just see with a lot of the opening up of the country, but then particularly with all the demonstrations across the country, what's going to happen in terms of the spread of this virus. So that's, I think, collectively we're holding our breath on that one. We were comfortable with where we saw things going. I think now it's kind of a wait and watch where the next few weeks come.
And so, Dr. Hochman, when you've joined us before, it's clear that you are in touch with state officials at the highest level. You're talking to CEOs and others. I believe you were in consultation with the Business Roundtable and other corporate groups. Help us understand what folks at that level are talking about now, especially as we think about reopening in a very cautious way across the country.
So I think there are two things. One is we're giving out a lot of advice on what's the best way to do it. And I have to say, from the business standpoint, a lot of the CEOs and companies are doing a great job thinking through how they get their workers back, what's the best thing to do. They're getting a lot of great medical input. So I was really pleased just to see the way they're responding. And then the second is specifically with a lot of the pharma CEOs talking about vaccine development. And the thing that I've been worrying about most is not as much about the vaccine development, but are we going to have the delivery mechanisms for those vaccines, enough glass vials, enough needles? And then what's the priority by which we start vaccinating 300 plus million Americans? Who do we start with? How do we do that? Those are all the preparations that we need to do now for 6 months from now. And I was glad to see at least the business community, and I was just talking to the CEO of a major pharmaceutical company. He said, look, we just spent the last 3 hours on that topic. So I was pleased to hear that.
Do we need federal government involvement in order to do it the way that it needs to be done so that we are ready in 6 months, perhaps, when a vaccine is there?
Yeah, I think the CEOs have gone beyond that and are just saying, okay, how do we get this done? I think we need to have coordination between the pharma companies and then each state is going to have to figure out how does it vaccinate its population. And one of the things that we have is that we do the influenza vaccine every year. Might that not be a good starting place to figure out how do we distribute the vaccine and everything else? So I think what's happened, I think in this next phase, people are just moving beyond.
And so, Dr. Hochman, just staying with vaccines for a moment, as you're talking to these CEOs and other folks within the medical community, and I know you're talking to researchers and whatnot, what's the realistic timetable? I mean, is 6 months still realistic in terms of getting something that is, if not sort of mass available to the extent that it really makes a dent in how we can live our lives?
Right. So I think there are two aspects to this. One is, kind of the ethical one where a number of people have agreed to get actually infected with COVID if they've gotten on the vaccine to accelerate the process to look at the efficacy. Because ultimately, if you have to wait for, the natural progression of the disease, it takes time. So a lot of people are working through that. If that happens, that's going to really accelerate the development of understanding whether we have an efficacious vaccine. So that's going to be a big, big step there. But it's really exciting, the amount of research that's being done, and more than likely, we'll have more than one vaccine. It's going to be several different ones that we're going to be looking at.
If I can switch gears just for a second, Dr. Hochman, I think all of us, there was a story, several stories that have come out, and I know Bloomberg News has covered as well, about, the amount of bailout money that went to different hospital systems. And I think you folks got about $500 million. Help us understand, because you're one of the more, one of the largest systems in the country and one of the more, I guess, financially solvent hospital systems. Help us understand how that makes sense.
So, okay, I'm so glad you asked that question. I think I need to teach the New York Times about numerator and denominator. We have 51 hospitals. We have 120,000 people, and we're in 7 states. So obviously, when you break that down hospital and hospital by clinic, it's actually a smaller amount than has happened in other places. Secondly, we reminded them that they didn't want to print it, that we do about $1.5 billion of free care each year in community service. And then the third is on an EBITDA and margin basis, we're a 1% to 2% margin operation. So I wish I was a Silicon powerhouse and all the words that they used. And I think most of us in healthcare saw how wrong they got the story. They were just looking at the top line numbers that were given out. And then also we're looking, where were the areas of the country that were most affected? Obviously, we're in Los Angeles and Seattle that were heavily affected by COVID-19. Right. So I could go on, but it's unfortunate how a lot of the stories get editorialized and aren't based on the facts.
Right. Dr. Hochman, we really appreciate your input, as always. Dr. Hochman from Providence Health. We do want to take you to D.C., where the White House press secretary is making some comments. Let's listen in.
Only 2 states have deployed more than 1,000. There are 350,000 National Guard available overall, and for the lawlessness we are seeing, far more needs to be done. Governors across the country must act, deploy the National Guard as it's fit, and protect American communities. As President Trump has said repeatedly, it's very important that we have peaceful protesters and support the right of peaceful protesters, but we cannot allow a situation like what happened in Minneapolis to descend further into lawless anarchy and chaos. And we understand that very well. And with that, I'll take questions. Yes.
To your point, the country is in crisis. There's a global pandemic that has claimed more than 100,000 lives. At least 40 million people are unemployed. There are now protests and racial tension ripping apart many cities. Where is the president? Why has he not delivered an address to the nation, as many of his predecessors have in a time of domestic crisis?
So the president has delivered multiple statements on this. The president, as recently as 48 hours ago, was out talking about what a tragedy the death of George Floyd was, how it has weighed on his heart, and how he encourages peace and lawfulness in our streets and peaceful protests. So he has said that repeatedly. He's made many statements to this effect, but what I would note is continual statements, as he's made day and day and day and day again, they don't stop anarchy. What stops anarchy is action, and that's what the president is working on right now.
To that point about the anarchists, you said this morning that the president is focused right now on rooting out Antifa. George Floyd did not die in Antifa custody. He died in police custody. What's the president doing to reform policing tactics and excessive use of force by police?
Yeah, so it's an important question for sure. And this president, if you look at the actions his DOJ has taken, there's a civil rights investigation into the death of Ahmaud Arbery. There's a civil rights investigation into the death of George Floyd. It is a tragedy what we saw. I mentioned to you that the president was extremely upset when he saw that video. And the DOJ continues to pursue those charges. And he's recognized injustices for a long time, since he was a candidate. He talked about Sandra Bland and what a terrible video that was too. So he recognizes injustices where they are, but at the same time, he also recognizes that we can't allow organized groups like Antifa to commit some of the heinous acts that we've seen. John.
Billy, in his call with the governors, the president said that he had put General Milley in charge of all this. What does that mean?
Yeah, so
staff in charge of policing American streets. What did he mean?
So I'm not going to get ahead of any actions that will be announced, but what I will say to you is this, that he has had 2 briefings today with Secretary Esper and AG Barr, and General Milley was there, and there will be additional federal assets deployed across the nation. There will be a central command center in conjunction with the state and local governments that will include General Milley, Secretary Esper, and AG Barr, but I won't go any further in announcing what actions.
Can you explain what the president meant when he told the governors, I am put General Milley in charge? What does that mean? Because that sounds like a total break here. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff being in charge of a domestic issue.
And ensuring that, as the president has said, and this has been taken out of context, by the way, that our streets are dominated with a police force and with a National Guard presence. So that, let me explain a little bit about how this works. If there's a peaceful protest, police will form a line. And what we've seen are those lines have been overwhelmed by massive protests that have turned into riots. The peaceful protests to be distinguished from the riots we've seen. And when those lines are overwhelmed, law enforcement gets on the defense. So what the president has said is he wants to dominate the streets with National Guard, with a police presence. And what studies have shown, as General Milley noted, he was in that governor's call, and his points all pertain to the National Guard. And he noted that there are several studies that when there's an overwhelming National Guard presence, it actually de-escalates the situation and causes less civil unrest. So General Milley has really been on point in talking about the National Guard, the effectiveness, and ensuring that they're utilized to great effect across the country.
What's been taken out of context? Because I mean, I have the exact quote. It's a very simple one. He just says that he has put General Milley in charge.
No, I wasn't suggesting that quote was out of context. The dominate. I've seen some networks that have talked about dominating protesters, and I've been around the president all day. Anytime he's used the word dominate, it was with regard to dominating the streets and ensuring that we have peace in our streets. Yes. Yes, Charlie.
Thanks. In addition to the tough talk the president has been talking about taking action against looters and some of the violent elements in the protests that we've seen, why isn't he also supplementing that message by calling on these people to remain calm, to go home, to not destroy property, businesses, so on?
Yeah, he has done that repeatedly. Look, he talked about understanding the pain that people are feeling, and he does understand that pain. He's talked several times about the right to peacefully protest, and I've seen some of these peaceful protests, some of these sit-ins, and it's a real shame when you have anarchy and anarchists come in and you have Antifa come in, and it really dilutes the message of the protesters, and it's a legitimate reason they're protesting. So he hates to see Antifa come in and really dampen that message, which has been in many cases peaceful, but has been overtaken and overwhelmed by an organized effort of people from out of state coming in and causing havoc.
Is he traveling on Friday? Is he going to Maine?
He still plans on going to Maine. I haven't heard any other changes to that effect. Yeah. Ouija.
Thank you.
I like your mask. That's really cool.
I have a quick follow-up about police reform. National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien says he does not think there is systemic racism among law enforcement in the U.S. Does President Trump share that view?
Look, I think where the president stands is he does not believe, he fundamentally rejects the idea that these egregious actions of these 4 Minnesota officers are representative of our police force as a whole. Most of our officers in this country are good, hardworking men and women who work every day to police our streets. He's recognized cases of injustice. I noted Sandra Bland back when he was in the primary. I've noted more recently Ahmaud Arbery and then George Floyd. So he recognizes these injustices. He puts a focus on them, but he also recognizes our valiant police officers who have taken to the streets each and every night over the last 6 nights and protected our communities.
And on Antifa, can you explain what the legal authority the president has is for designating Antifa as a terrorist organization? And can you also talk about why he does not want to label white supremacist groups that are domestically located as terrorist organizations as well?
So let me address the first part about legal authority. Title 18, Section 2331 allows that the term, it defines domestic terrorism as involving acts dangerous to human life that appear intended to influence the policy of a government, and other elements are laid out, and it allows the Department of Justice, when utilizing this statute, to invoke greater investigatory authority and to invoke harsher penalties. I would note that the Justice Department has in the past used domestic terrorism in consultation with acts of white supremacy or what were racially motivated acts. Like in April 2020, a Florida man pled guilty to threatening an African-American Charlottesville City Council candidate. And at that time, the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force was utilized. Same in the case of February 2020, where it was used in connection to 4 racially motivated violent extremists. And I would also note the president's long history of condemning white supremacy and racism. There is no place in society for these egregious, despicable ideologies. Jen?
Why haven't he designated any white nationalist groups as terrorist organizations?
It has been used. I explained how in this case that domestic terrorism will be used as a way that the crime is prosecuted. It's a prosecutorial method, and it was utilized in the same exact way with regard to white supremacy. Yes?
Kaylee, on the Minnesota police officers, is he suggesting that they should be charged as well as the officer who's already been charged, the other 3? And also on Antifa, can you explain a little bit about how would he know, or how is he talking about how he would identify members of Antifa? Since they're a very loose organization, it would be very difficult to tell who is part of Antifa.
So first, I was just on the call with the president where he expressed his dismay with those 3 officers who watched. I'll leave it to the state to pursue those charges if they decide to. It was the state that pursued the initial charge, but the president has expressed his complete dismay with those actions. With Antifa, I do think it's important to note that they are a big element of this protest. AG Barr has noted that. Ambassador O'Brien has noted that. We have ample evidence that DOJ has received indicating that Antifa is responsible for that unrest. But as to exactly how Antifa is identified, that would be more of a question for DOJ. Yes.
When you talk about additional federal assets, does the president have authority to deploy forces across the country beyond the National Guard?
He does. And look, we're looking at every tool in the federal toolkit available to us. You know, ideally, this would have been resolved at the state level. The states, after all, have the police power embedded in the 10th Amendment, and it is their responsibility to patrol their streets. But you're right to say that there are many federal authorities, including the one you cited, available to us.
Did you bring this up with the governors in the phone call today?
The focus of the call with the governors was really the National Guard, not that specific tool in the toolkit that you mentioned, but the National Guard and how it should be utilized much stronger than it's currently being utilized. Yes, I will go to, let's see, Jeff.
Okay, thanks. Following up on what John was asking earlier, Governor Whitmer, she said she found the president's call today deeply disturbing, and she said the president told the governors they need to put it down or they would be overridden. So is there a specific authority he's using? Because as you know, Posse Comitatus really prevents the use of the army to put down domestic insurrection of any kind.
Yeah, I don't know why Governor Whitmer would be dismayed at the president telling governors to do their job. It is their responsibility to police their streets. They have the police power embedded in the Constitution. They have quite clearly, many of them, failed to do their job. Look at the scenes we have seen. And it's gotten to the point where today the president has said, enough is enough. You know, there are tools I can use, namely deploying National Guard, many others that Steve cited one, the Insurrection Act. It's one of the tools available. Whether the president decides to pursue that, that's his prerogative. Right now, we're looking at a focus on the National Guard. That's where it currently stands. And, you know, there's a distinction between the National Guard and military forces in the street. I would note the National Guard are the friends and neighbors in these communities who are used, and as I noted, the study from General Milley, used to great effect when they are deployed. So the focus of the call was the National Guard, encouraging the deployment, far more than the 17,000 out there, and utilizing them this evening, certainly.
All right, you have been listening to a press briefing led by the press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany, there at the White House. And Carol, I have to say, you know, you and I were chatting a little bit virtually as that was going on, and, you know, a series of questions and answers, not something that we have become used to seeing, candidly. This new press secretary certainly facing the press, giving answers in a very, you know, sort of back and forth sort of way.
Well, even having a daily press briefing, right? Something that went away for several weeks or even longer. So getting an update on certainly.
Months and months.
It was months, actually, right.
Yeah.
So, you know, getting used to, you know, kind of having these back in and talking about the day's events and what the administration's policies are. And I will say one of the key things are, I think at this point is how do the disruptions around the country, the protests, how are they controlled? And at this point, it does sound like Trump is, the president's demanding action to protect citizens, talking a lot about deploying the National Guard as they see fit. but also the White House press secretary saying that additional federal assets will be deployed, I guess, if necessary. So certainly keeping an eye on it, but in many ways, not unlike the virus, leaving it for states to handle.
Right, and she did clarify some comments that had been reported from that call that the president had with governors, saying that when he was using the word dominating, he was talking about dominating the streets rather than the protesters.
Correct.
That seems like an important point of clarification. So we're going to get more on what she had to say. We'll continue to monitor that coming up. Right now, let's get back to Charlie Pellet. He's got an update on the trading day and some business headlines. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much, Jason Kelly. We're higher across the board here, but investors mostly looking past the weekend of violent protests across the United States. S&P off at session highs, but up 10 now at 3,055, a gain of 0.4%. The Dow is up 51, higher by 0.2%. Nasdaq is up 61. For Nasdaq, that is a gain right now of just about 0.7%. Gilead Sciences shares, they are moving lower after its drug remdesivir showed only a limited benefit in a large trial of more moderate patients with COVID-19, a result that may shift perceptions of the therapy already cleared for use in severe cases of the disease. Gilead shares down now by 2.6%. Gun stocks, they are surging today after that weekend of protests across the country. Among some of the gun names today, Sturm Ruger is higher, pushing higher now by 9.6%. We've got Smith & Wesson up 15.8%, and Vista Outdoor, it is up now by almost 9%. 10-year down 5/32 with a yield of 0.66%. Gold up 0.4%, 17.37 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude, little changed at 35.51 a barrel, up about 0.1%. And gold up 0.4%, 17.37 the ounce. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Well, let's understand more about what we've heard from the administration today and what we've just heard from the press secretary. We're going to bring in Josh Wingrove, Bloomberg News White House correspondent, joining us on the phone. All right, so Josh, break it down. What are the most important things we're hearing from the administration today?
Yeah, we sort of began the day with the question of whether or not President Trump would give some sort of address, and it doesn't look like he's going to do that. Instead, he spoke with governors for an hour, Democrats and Republicans. An audio of that call obtained by Bloomberg and by other media have said or have showed that he really encouraged governors to, quote, dominate the streets. We've been talking about it, just before this. This is a message that's being repeated right now by his press secretary as her briefing is ongoing. Throughout that hour-long call, he used phrases like knock them down like bowling pins, National Guard being able to cut through protests like a knife through butter, really sort of using language that was criticized on the call by a Democratic governor of Illinois as incendiary, but saying the governor should be calling in the National Guard to take control of their streets, and saying that sort of agitators or outside agitators, Antifa as he calls them, are sort of making it worse or seizing the protests, if you will, by what the White House has said are more legitimate protesters.
So we just heard from the White House press secretary, and she got questions about this whole idea of, or what the president said on that call with governors about dominating protesters. Did she conflict what was on that call that we heard, that recording that the president had with governors, or did she just kind of add more confusion to what he, what exactly he meant, Josh?
I think she tried to clarify in a couple of ways where Trump left things up in the air. One was, okay, well, when you talk about cracking down or talk about wiping out, as Trump said, Occupy Wall Street, he likened it to wiping out Occupy Wall Street. Are you talking about the protests or the protesters? And she said, well, he's talking about the protests to the extent that you can draw a difference. One thing that she did not say is just what President Trump has put General Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, in charge of. He said on that call that it seemed to say that he was in charge of the National Guard rolling out to help contain these protests, which raised a lot of questions. She pulled away from that. So, it's ongoing right now. I guess we hold out hope for some answers. One other thing is that the president seemed to suggest that perhaps the other three officers in Minnesota should face charges. Of course, the one whose knee was on the neck of George Floyd. Kayleigh McEnany, the press secretary, deferred when asked whether he thinks that, in fact, those three should face charges, said it's up to the local authorities.
And Josh, what are you hearing from other quarters of the administration, especially about what's happening right there in Washington? I mean, literally steps from where the president and the seat of government is, at least the executive branch. I mean, so much attention has rightly been focused on the protests, initially peaceful, it seems like, during the day, but then as evening comes on, this is a very local story for those in Washington.
Well, yeah, we've seen the mayor of Washington has put in an earlier curfew tonight. She was criticized for last night's curfew being too late. The president on Friday had what's called a condition red at the White House, basically a bad situation where they put him down into a protected area briefly. And that Friday night to Saturday morning was really some of the most active protests we've seen right at the White House. They were sort of up against and jostling against one of the outer sort of temporary fences. This is at the front door of the White House for sure, and that is what has led to calls or questions of, look, where is the president? Last public remarks on this, other than tweets, were Saturday, and he hasn't addressed this in a way that maybe other presidents have in the past. And the White House pushing back strongly on that, saying he's addressed this in a number of ways, including on Saturday. Of course, we've had those tweets yesterday. Law and order was one. He looks to be sort of taking that law and order approach to it. He's not commenting at length on the causes of these protests in the first place, on the issues of racial injustice and police brutality or concerns therein. He's instead focusing on the result and saying these protests are now at a hand. We got to crack down on the protests. So I guess, the protesters would argue, I'm sure, that he's putting the cart before the horse.
Right, exactly, which is what came up with that briefing where the reporters were pushing to remind everybody this was about police brutality. It's not just about the protests and the aftermath. Josh, I do wonder, Jason was talking about the administration. Does the administration back what the president's doing, or are there internal voices that are saying you're the leader of the nation? And this is happening in many states, that you need to make some kind of statement from the Oval Office or some statement from Washington about this. You need to be, the one that pulls everyone together. I'm just curious about what's going on inside the White House.
It does appear that there's a bit of discussion on this, and I suppose you'd expect that in any case. But Brooke Rollins, who's the new acting head of the Domestic Policy Council, and fairly senior position in the administration, she said today at a Politico event that all options are on the table, and sort of hinted at, look, yeah, we're deciding what to do. What I think set the tone though for today was Kayleigh McEnany, of course, as we said, her briefing ongoing. She was on Fox this morning and said no speech from the Oval Office will do anything against Antifa. Again, that's those far left agitators that are sort of a loosely organized group, if organized at all. So I think that statement, set the tone. She's going on a show that President Trump watches every day to say, look, we don't see a lot of value in having a speech from the Oval Office. So I suppose it's possible we could see that. There are signs that there's discussions in the administration about that, but the press secretary herself is saying, look, President is going to focus on what he's focusing on, and right now, today, that is encouraging governors to call in the National Guard.
All right, Josh, listen, we really appreciate the debrief with you. Josh Wingrove, he's our Bloomberg News White House correspondent, joining us on the phone. All right, let's get another check on world and national news headlines. For that, let's turn things over to Mark Mills. Hi, Mark.
Hello, Carol. President Donald Trump urged states to crack down on nationwide protests in the aftermath of the death of a black man at the hands of police in Minneapolis. You have to dominate, Trump said Monday in a video conference with governors and law enforcement. If you don't dominate, you're wasting your time. They're going to run over you. You're going to look like a bunch of jerks. Trump urged 10-year jail time for some protesters. Bloomberg News obtained an audio recording of Trump's comments, which were reported earlier by CBS News. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo says protests across the U.S. over the death of George Floyd should spark a national ban on excessive force by police officers. The Democratic governor said he will be talking to Mayor Bill de Blasio about potential curfew in New York City, where there were reports of looting and some disturbing videos of police encounters with the crowds. Cuomo said violent activity by protesters plays into the hands of people and forces who don't want to make changes. Mayor de Blasio said police misconduct during the protests must also be addressed.
Any officer does the wrong thing, there need to be consequences, and they need to be fast.
George Floyd's family is set to release results Monday of their own autopsy into his death. Prosecutors say preliminary results of an official autopsy said the combined effects of being restrained, potential intoxicants in Floyd's system, and his underlying health issues, including heart disease, likely contributed to his death. Black pastors and politicians challenged Joe Biden on Monday to outline what he would do as president to ease access to economic opportunity and overhaul the criminal justice system as violent protests sweep the country. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Mark Mills. Back to Bloomberg.
Mark, thanks a lot. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Well, one of the most read stories on the Bloomberg today takes us to the ongoing discussion of how work is going to be conducted and maybe more importantly, where it's going to be conducted. And I have to say, this story struck me because I had a socially distanced conversation over the weekend with a neighbor of mine out in the street talking about how much style of work and the location of work has changed since we've all been working from home. And he brought up the very salient point that companies and especially financial firms have invested a huge amount in getting people set up at home. And so the notion that, yes, there was a certain amount that just had to be done, but that they're not just going to abandon all that infrastructure that they now have set up. And so this whole idea that the backup site going forward may not be a disaster recovery center, it may be sending people home.
Yeah, exactly. And so for all of those disaster recovery sites that people, that was considered, this is where you're going to go to if there's problems at home base, maybe we won't need them in the future. What's wild, Citigroup specifically, they talk about their head of technology, the firm's, I guess their bank's, the chief technology chief, he apparently bought up hardware and shipped more than 40,000 pieces of technology equipment to workers' homes as soon as they realized, okay, we've got to make sure that they knew that they were going to be having a lot of workers at home. At Citigroup, this must have been like in March or so, or maybe a little bit before that. And basically what they got is within weeks, 95% of Citi's trading floor was working remotely. And now the company can handle as many as 148,000 people logging onto its network at once. So basically, Jason, you're right. They've shipped all this equipment. People can now work from home. And so this might be the future, especially if there's other problems going forward.
And why shouldn't there be? I mean, that's the thing that we've really seen. And that's what ultimately makes this maybe more permanent than temporary, is this notion that it's been proven. And once it's this length of time, it's no longer just triage. It's more a really significant shift in the way things can be. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Stocks are climbing with the economy reopening amid unrest. We've got the Dow, the S&P, and Nasdaq all pushing higher right now. 13-point gain in the S&P 500 index, up by about 0.5%. Nasdaq is now up 65 points higher by 0.7%. The Dow up 81, up by 0.3%. 10-year yield 0.66%, down 4/30 seconds. Gold up 0.3%, 17.35 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.2%, 35.54 a barrel. Again, recapping, S&P higher, up 13, up 0.5%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week, and I have to say, like many people, I was reading everything I could get my hands on over the weekend and was so happy to come across a story by Peter Coy, because we look to him to just put things in perspective. And his piece, it's online and on the Bloomberg, about Minneapolis, is really a terrific read. He joins us on the phone from New Jersey, as does Joel Weber, the editor of Bloomberg Business Week. He's on our remote line from Brooklyn. So, Joel, this was one of these, I don't know, it's hard to sort of say it's a gift at a time when there's so much turmoil going on, but it really was some important perspective. Help us understand what Peter set out to do before we get to him.
Well, I mean, first of all, like, the country is just reeling right now, and that was even before the weekend started. And
right.
I was talking with Peter a little bit, and he said, I know Jacob Frey, and that immediately just caught my attention because, I just always respect sort of wherever Peter's mind goes. But the really the angle that he hit on here was one that kind of, I think, is it's very prescient in that it takes into account everything that Minneapolis has really gone through, not only on Phrase Watch, but just historically. And I think that infused in the article, and it also helps us make sense of what happened in Minneapolis, which then led to obviously a much bigger national moment that we're all watching very closely now. Peter, what was, for you, when you kind of look at Frey and Minneapolis, what are the elements that have jumped out to you?
Well, Minneapolis is well known as really a mecca of corporate philanthropy. They have a really dense concentration of Fortune 500, S&P 500 companies, and I can go down the list, but 3M, Best Buy, Target, on and on. And John D. Rockefeller, back in the 1970s, the third, that is, visited Minneapolis partly just to see, how could this one city be so famous for its corporate giving? And yet, at the same time, they have a very bad problem of racial inequality in housing and incomes and so on. So I just think it's tragic, and it deserves more study, partly because the people who subscribe to Bloomberg, read Bloomberg Business Week, listen to Bloomberg Radio, are the kind of people who work for some of these companies and think of themselves as doing the right thing, and yet somehow the right outcomes are not happening.
Well, and I'm going to say, we have a guest coming up after this, John Hope Bryant at Operation Hope, and I want to talk to him about corporate responsibility in all of this, because as you say, Peter, the Twin Cities, I mean, it's like a who's who's list of corporate America: Target, Cargill, Medtronic, 3M, Ecolabs, General Mills, Best Buy, U.S. Bank. And, we've had conversations with so many different executives at different firms about, diversity, inclusion, equality, putting, programs in place at companies, and yet here we are.
Yep, that's a tragedy. So I know Jacob Frey, the mayor. He was a runner. He actually represented the U.S. in the Pan American Games in the marathon, and then at a young age he became the mayor. He's a very progressive kind of guy, and here he was doing sort of the right things to put Minneapolis on the track to reducing some of this racial inequality. This came along, and it's just devastating the city, and it's going to be hard to rebuild from this.
Peter, we wrote a feature, which you cite in your story last year, sort of about this movement that's been happening across the country, and Minneapolis became one of the most interesting places to watch, which is about YIMBY and NIMBY and sort of the end of zoning single-family housing. What is the role between that and sort of what's happened in Minneapolis over time?
So a lot of cities around the country had basically segregation. Blacks were not allowed to live in certain neighborhoods, and that went away. But it was kind of replaced by zoning laws, which were not on their face segregationist, but had some of the same effects. 70% of the residential land in Minneapolis has been zoned for single families. A lot of blacks could not afford to buy houses, and they were stuck in apartments and not able to build wealth, and of course segregated. So Minneapolis became the first big city in the United States in 2018 to repeal single-family housing, which allows apartment buildings to be built all around the city. This is quite a dramatic event because you can imagine how many homeowners you might have been expected to resist this, and yet it passed the council and approved by the mayor. And that's what I'm talking about when I talk about the city trying to move towards, fixing its original sins. And that's why it's so tragic that this happened anyway when they seem to be on a course towards better times.
And I know Peter, it's impossible to predict anything these days, and certainly it's too soon to make a lot of predictions about what happens tonight, much less what happens in the near to midterm. But, what does Minneapolis do at this point? And knowing what you do know about the leadership there, what do you think the playbook is?
I think we have to go back to the 1960s to see how it played out back then. And this is similar in some ways. It's a very slow process of healing. I'm sorry to say that it doesn't always work. I mean, there are cities like Newark and Detroit that were really lastingly damaged by the riots they had. There was white flight, there was business flight, and they're, to this day, depopulated and poorer than they were before those riots. Just praying that doesn't happen this time.
All right. Well, we're going to leave it there. We thank you both so much. Peter Coy, joining us, economics editor for Bloomberg Business Week, joining us on the phone from New Jersey, and Joel Weber, the editor of Bloomberg Business Week, joining us from Brooklyn. And Carol, it really is one of those stories that reminds us, I think, something that we're going to be talking about throughout the course of this show, and I'm guessing throughout the course of this week and maybe longer, which is everything, quoting Joel Weber, is a business story in many ways. And the economics of a place and the role of corporations, and as you said, we're going to talk about this in just a few minutes with John Hope Bryant, it has become even more important. And one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about, and I'm guessing you have too, is this notion of what do we expect companies to do and what do we expect them to say, and maybe in reverse order. We know that they're going to say something. What do we expect them to do? What is their responsibility at a time like this? And I feel like now more than ever, they have to act.
Well, this is nothing, it's not dissimilar to what we've been talking about with the virus, about, these inequalities. It's not like they all of a sudden just happen because of the virus. The same thing, with what we've seen play out in Minneapolis and really, elsewhere around the country. Not everyone is given the same equal start or access to opportunities. And we've talked so much about kind of, where you grow up often means what kind of perhaps public education you get, and that means what kind of higher education you get and what kind of job you get and what kind of healthcare you get. I mean, it's all connected, and I think it's really remarkable what the Minneapolis mayor tried to do in terms of single-family zoning. I mean, this is how you start to change things, and I agree, Jason. I feel like we have been having these conversations. I know I certainly have in my career for years, and so enough talking, and let's actually start to see some action.
All right, for those of you listening in New York, D.C., and San Francisco, watching on YouTube, Bloomberg Business Week is going to continue next with John Hope Bryant. If you're listening on 106.1 in Boston, Bay State Business, that is coming up next. This is Bloomberg.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We move into the final hour of trading on this back-to-work Monday with the Dow, the S&P, and Nasdaq all advancing. 15-point gain right now for the S&P at 3,059, up 0.5%. The Dow up 103, higher by 0.4. Nasdaq rallying 69 points, up 0.7%. Tech stocks leading the way higher. We've got the 10-year right now down 2.30 seconds and looking at a yield of 0.65%. Gold up 0.4%, 17.37 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.4%. 35.63 a barrel on West Texas Intermediate crude. Stocks higher as investors focus on signs of economic recovery amid further tension with China, lackluster virus drug test results, and the threat of further civil unrest in the U.S. Now, as for markets and the turmoil we saw in American streets over the weekend, Terry Haynes is the founder of Pangea Policy.
The markets have proved resilience in the past. You know, we went through what we went through in the last week in this country. We went through every weekend for years in the 60s and 70s. And the markets proved very resilient to that. And I anticipate they'll do so here today as well.
Analysts at Evercore ISI say Apple is on track for a market capitalization of $2 trillion over the next 4 years. They see a combination of earnings growth and a boost from the services and wearables business, helping the tech giant become the first company to reach that value. Apple shares, they are up today by 1.4%. In the year-to-date column on the Bloomberg, Apple is up by 9.7%, now trading at $322.22. San Francisco-based Zynga is buying Turkish mobile game maker Peak for $1.8 billion, marking its biggest acquisition yet. Zynga shares up now by 6.5% at $9.74. Recapping equities higher with the S&P up 16, a gain of 0.5%. The Dow is also up 0.5, Nasdaq higher by 0.8%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Jason Kelly on Bloomberg Radio.
Days since we all learned of and saw the death of George Floyd. We are definitely a nation in crisis once again. Back with us is John Hope Bryant. He's the founder, chairman, and CEO of the Atlanta-based Operation Hope. John is also Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Bryant Group Ventures and co-founder of Global Dignity. He joins us on the phone from Atlanta. John, it's nice to have you back with us, but I do wish it was under different circumstances. I do feel like, you know, like the virus, there are things that persist in our society, inequalities, injustices, lack of accountability, you know, that were there, but we're seeing them once again front and center. It's horrible. I do wonder, you know, what happens as a result of what's happening in Minneapolis right now? What changes?
You know, consciousness is like a rubber band that is expanded. You know, it never returns to its original size. First of all, thank you and your colleagues for all that you do. Thanks for being a light on the hill in a moment of darkness. The media is playing an outsized role in our consciousness these days because some of our national leaders are not stepping up in a way that's holistic, that's bridge building, that's bringing us together, that's providing a light and a way forward. So thank you guys for doing that.
Thank you.
You know, again, a rubber band is expanded. It doesn't return to its original size. It's forever extended. And so when things like this happen, you stop having black people saying, I feel discriminated against, and white people saying, I have no idea what you're talking about. As Will Smith said, racism did not get discovered, it got filmed. And now when something like this happens, it just becomes undeniable. It's like the people of goodwill, which are most people, just go, that's just ridiculous. Like that's disgusting. That we can't. That's not our nation. That's not what if that's my child? And we start having a we conversation and not a me-you conversation. And then you can begin to do something about it. Over the weekend, I've had a problem with the looting and Operation was founded after the Rodney King riots in 1992, so this strikes me very close to home. We're the largest in what we do in the country because we responded differently to the riot after it was over, decided to respond, not react. But this rioting and the looting, if that continues, we will destroy the moral authority that George Floyd's death gave us to honor his legacy. This weekend, though, I was, talking to some young people, and they said, John, you get to be at the table. You get to talk to people. You get to do media. You get to go to the White House. You get to go CEOs' offices and so on. They listen to you. We've been talking. My grandfather was talking. My father's been talking. I'm talking. They don't listen to us. No one listens to us until we tear some stuff up. So they said, look, we don't want to tear stuff up. It's primarily not us tearing stuff up. We've been infiltrated, so on and so forth. But when stuff gets torn up, people are actually listening to us. So now we can hand the baton back to you to go talk for us in these boardrooms and hopefully cut a deal to get me an internship, to stop the poverty, increase the peace, increase some legislation to get us some fairness. And I think that goes back to that Dr. King quote. He said that violence is the language of the unseen and the unheard. Dr. King wasn't endorsing violence. He was acknowledging the pain.
Well, and John, I'm glad you brought up Dr. King because you're there in Atlanta, and I think a lot of us saw your mayor, and I'm from Atlanta, as you know, and so I was paying very close attention, even closer attention to it, the legacy of Dr. King and the legacy of so many others, whether it's former Mayor Andy Young, whether it's obviously Congressman Lewis, and so many others like you who are down there in Atlanta, which has, again, such a rich legacy here. What have you learned, and what are we learning there that maybe we can take in a broader sense? Because Mayor Bottoms, spoke so passionately about that legacy, and I wonder how that translates, especially to a business audience.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. I think that this goes back, by the way, things are calming down here, where things are popping off and heating up other places. We're starting to transition a bit here. And I think it's in part because the mayor, who's a black woman, said, stop the looting. Like, you're not honoring our legacy. This is ridiculous. She behaved like a parent. And a lot of our national leaders are not behaving like good parents. But she behaved like a good parent. Then you had that. Then you had corporate leaders step up, yes. But you had moral leaders like Andrew Young, Ambassador Andrew Young, my mentor, say, you're breaking my heart. I'm crying now. We didn't give our lives for this. Then you had T.I. and Killer Mike from the hip-hop generation saying, hey, guys, hey, we own property over here. Like, stop all this looting. Like, this is not the way. This is not the way, right? So it becomes culturally unsexy, culturally unacceptable for those who want to deal in this world we live in after this is over to continue with this. So we acknowledge the pain, we acknowledge all that, but Atlanta's just to me, Atlanta's a moral center of America because of the civil rights legacy. This, to me, speaks to going back to the 60s. Birmingham, Alabama, and Memphis could have been Atlanta. Same, actually more population, better location for an international airport, but they fought over race, and we decided to fight over money.
Hey, John.
And that became the conversation at this time. Is, hey, you guys, you can't destroy the CNN Center. You can't destroy the mall, right? This is where our friends work. This is where your cousin works on Monday. You can't destroy it on Sundays. You got to go to work on Monday. Go ahead.
No, that's a really good point. John, just unfortunately only got about 40 seconds left here. I mean, Atlanta, Minneapolis, the Twin Cities, these are all cities that are, home to a lot of well-known corporations. What's the responsibility of CEOs and companies in all of this? A lot of them have diversity programs. They talk a lot. But what do we need to see in terms of action? And my apologies, only got about 30 seconds.
Reimagine your budget. Look at your annual budget. If your budget has a B attached to it, reimagine your budget. Where are your interns going? Where are your apprenticeships going? Where's your advertising dollars going? Where are your subcontractors going? And see if you can empower minorities and underserved and women with those opportunities, because that's going to create peace. The best way to stop a bullet is a job. This is about poverty. This is about poverty.
All right. Well, we really appreciate your time. We wish we had more. We're going to have you back really soon. What a treat. John Hope Bryan, as Carol said, we wish it were under different circumstances, but there are a few voices who are as clear as yours. We really appreciate it. Founder and CEO of Operation Hope, joining us on the phone from my hometown, Atlanta, and it does have a very rich legacy. All right, let's get back to Mark Mills. He has got World of National Headlines. Hey, Mark.
Jason, thanks. President Donald Trump on Monday derided many governors as weak and demanded tougher crackdowns on burning and stealing among some demonstrations in the aftermath of violent protests in dozens of American cities. Trump spoke to governors on a video teleconference that also included law enforcement and national security officials, telling the state leaders they have to get much tougher. Most of you are weak, said Trump. You have to arrest people. The brother of George Floyd appealed for peace Monday in the aftermath of riots and arson fires following the death of his brother in Minneapolis. Wearing a face mask with the image of his brother's face on it, Terrence Floyd appeared at the intersection in South Minneapolis where his brother died a week ago.
Let's do this another way. Let's do this another way. Let's stop thinking that our voice don't matter and vote. Not just vote for the president, vote for the preliminaries, vote for everybody. Educate yourself.
New York's mayor says he's considering putting the city under curfew after nights of destruction followed 3 days of largely peaceful protests over George Floyd's death. Mayor Bill de Blasio had previously rejected imposing a curfew. Now he says it's under consideration, but no final decision has been made. The first astronauts launched by SpaceX declared victory Monday in NASA's Cosmic Capture the Flag game. They quickly claimed the prize left behind at the International Space Station nearly a decade ago by the last crew to launch from the U.S. Congratulations, SpaceX, you got the flag, said NASA astronaut Doug Hurley. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Mark Mills.
Mark, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. And just briefly, I remember meeting John Hope Bryant for the first time when we were in Atlanta for the Super Bowl. It seems like about 1,000 years ago. What an impressive guy.
I just got to say, what's really staying with me is that last line he said, that this is about poverty.
Yeah.
And if people have opportunities, truly opportunities, their life is going to be very, very different. And what we're realizing, and we're seeing it certainly virus, we're certainly seeing it with Minneapolis, that not everybody has opportunities. We talk about everything has a business angle or an economic angle. Most people, when they feel like they don't have opportunities and can't improve their life, they're kind of stuck, and it puts them in a bad way. And it's not fair in a country that is so rich as the United States, right? It needs to be much more spread.
Yeah, what stuck with me, and obviously it's parochial for me, is what he said about Atlanta. He's totally right. Memphis, Birmingham, they fought about race. Atlanta fought about money, which Atlanta is far from perfect. Believe me, I could spend the rest of the day talking about its shortcomings in many ways. But what it did from an economic perspective, and that is why you have the T.I.s and the Killer Mikes and the Andy Youngs and so many who have the wherewithal to stand up and say, hold on a second, this is what this is about.
But what's happening in an area like, Minnesota, Minneapolis, right? Twin Cities, where there's so many companies, right, and corporations who you would think are creating these programs that are talking about equalities and diversity. And why is it not being much more pervasive in the rest of society, Jason? What's happening? Where's the breakdown?
Because it's about who's running the companies, I think. It's about the level in many ways. And I think when you see, what Killer Mike said, which was so powerful, and what Mayor Bottom said was basically, she said, you're looting those stores on the West Side. Killer Mike owns those stores. Tyler Perry owns that piece. So that's the power of economics in many ways. That was the message that I took from John Hope Bryant and from Mayor Bottoms as I listened to her over the weekend. Well, we were going to talk about something else, but we talked about that. This is Bloomberg.
Just stayed with me.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We've got 43 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell. Stocks higher across the board. Let's head right over to the First Word breaking news desk for today's afternoon call. Here's Bill Maloney.
And good afternoon, Charlie. That's right. U.S. stocks in the green today with FANG stocks outperforming again. Dow's currently up 80 points. S&P's gained 13. Nasdaq climbs by 62. The U.S. 10-year yield at 0.66%. WTI crude futures are a little changed. Gold gains 8, and transports are also little changed. Leaders to the upside in the Dow, Boeing, Goldman Sachs, and ExxonMobil, while Pfizer fell 7% and led to the downside. In other news, the New York new virus cases fell below 1,000 for the first time in 11 weeks. And wrapping things up, Domino's Pizza gained as much as 2.2%, hitting a record high of $3.94 a share. And Zoom Video rose as much as 14.7%. The company reports tomorrow. Live from the First Breaking News Desk, I'm Bill Maloney. Charlie?
Okay, we thank you very much, Bill. And to hear live breaking news over your Bloomberg Time Squawk, SQUAWK on your terminal, I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Well, protests, they are obviously going on here across the United States, and we hope things will continue to calm as we go through the course of this week. Protests, though, they are nothing new in China and specifically in Hong Kong. We've been talking about it for months and months. They have restarted with a vengeance, and it's all because of a continuing conflict between Beijing and Hong Kong. Andy Brown has been following that incredibly closely, editorial director, of course, for Bloomberg New Economy. He lived in that part of the world for many, many years, and he's been following it for us and sharing his conversations with us, and we love having him back. He's on the phone from New Hampshire. So, Andy, we've all been sort of domestically focused, I think, rightly so, over the past 48 to 72 hours. But, meanwhile, this issue with China and with Hong Kong and involving the relationship between the United States and China has continued to escalate. What's the most important thing we need to know here?
Well, there is actually a direct connection between protests in the United States and protests in Hong Kong. The Chinese government, of course, gloats at whenever the United States gets into trouble and is able to tell a domestic audience that, look, our system is superior. America is in decline. Lots of talk about, U.S. hypocrisy, criticizing the response to pro-democracy demonstrations in Hong Kong, and then noting the behavior of some of the police against protesters and the media here in the United States. But the immediate connection with Hong Kong is that, every June 4th, many protesters, thousands of protesters in Hong Kong take to the streets to commemorate the anniversary of the crushing of the pro-democracy protests in Beijing's Tiananmen Square on June the 4th in 1989. And this is the first real test of this national security law, which China's parliament rammed through over the heads of the Hong Kong legislature. And the Hong Kong police have banned that protest. So a lot of people say, well, this national security law won't have any impact. It will just sort of be parked to one side, never get used. And already you're seeing the effect in terms of a political tightening in Hong Kong. Of course, the police say this is a COVID-19 restriction, but very clearly this was the pretext to prevent commemoration this year.
What do you make of the continued, Andy, escalation between the two? As you said, China, kind of pointing out to President Trump's own domestic woes because of these protests and talking about double standards, between what's going on here and versus Hong Kong. At the same time, we have China, halting some U.S. farm imports, so that threatens that phase one of the trade deal. So how do we put that all in context, kind of those moves together?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting when Donald Trump on Friday, when he announced the official response, U.S. response to the passage of this national security law, and he promised a very tough response, and we were all wondering what that might be. And in fact, it was a very watery, vague sort of statement that was sort of long on anguish and outrage and short on specifics. And very importantly, he did not say that the U.S. would abandon the Phase 1 trade deal. And that's really critical. I mean, we talked about this before as being one of the few slender threads that now hold the relationship between the U.S. and China together. So much so that, today in Hong Kong, or yesterday in Hong Kong, the markets took Trump's pronouncements on Hong Kong as a reason to buy, and we saw stocks going up.
Yeah, I mean, that's the amazing thing, and I'm glad you went there, because amid all of this, I mean, we're looking at this here in the United States, but also in China, this notion that investors say, all right, like, we can deal with this, like, we're just going to keep buying, folks. How do you square that as someone who looks at the new economy?
Yeah, look, there's probably more sound and thunder in this than anything else, because the truth of the matter is that, there's a lot of talk. Will Trump, renege, or will
right.
Trump, throw Hong Kong out of this sort of special trading relationship with the U.S.? The truth is that Hong Kong, the United States runs a very large trade surplus with Hong Kong, and if it actually did away with Hong Kong's special trading status, it would hurt the U.S. and U.S. companies far more than it would Hong Kong. So the fact is that there isn't a whole lot that the U.S. that Trump can do, to hit back against China over Hong Kong without hurting its own interests. I mean, it's quite a dilemma that the White House now faces.
Yeah, it is interesting, and as complicated as it is, there are some very clear economic consequences or lack thereof, depending on where you're looking. All right, Andy Brown, thank you so much, editorial director for Bloomberg New Economy. We're so happy to catch up with him every week because it's a story. There are a lot of connections to it, Carol.
Well, and you got to really understand trade and what the consequences are, because in many ways, U.S. companies are ultimately the ones that get hurt in this process. So you really have to understand the details and nuances of the trade back and forth. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Massar, Jason Kelly on this Monday, and this is Bloomberg.
Broadcasting live to New York, Bloomberg 1130. To Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 99.1. To Boston, Bloomberg 1061. To San Francisco, Bloomberg 960. To the country, Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
Yes, indeed. Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Master along with Jason Kelly. Coming up, we got the chart of the day with Dave Wilson, and he's taking a look at the bear market.
Yes, indeed. And maybe defining it and putting some parameters in a way that you might not expect. I like it.
Exactly.
How's he going to find a song for that, though?
I have no idea. All right, stick around for that. Let's get back to your top business stories and another update on the trading day. We've got 29 minutes to go, Charlie.
Stocks higher across the board right now with the Dow, the S&P, Nasdaq all advancing. 102-point gain for the Dow, up 0.4%. S&P's up 14, up 0.5%. Nasdaq up 72, higher by 0.8%. Stocks higher as investors focus on signs of economic recovery amid further tension with China, lackluster virus drug test results, and the threat of further civil unrest in the United States. Let's begin with Gilead Sciences. Its drug remdesivir showed only a limited benefit in a large trial of more moderate patients with COVID-19, a result that may shift perceptions of the therapy already cleared for use in severe cases of the disease. Gilead Sciences shares, they are moving lower today by 3.1% on a day when the rest of the market is moving higher. Some schools around the world are reopening to students as coronavirus lockdowns ease, raising questions about the timing and the potential impact on school children. Dr. Joshua Sharfstein is Vice Dean at the Bloomberg Johns Hopkins School of Public Health.
So you have to imagine that there's some families, if there are very vulnerable people at home, that are going to be very nervous about sending their kids to school, and that's understandable. So I think most places are going to be offering an online option in that case. Same for teachers who may be particularly vulnerable, older teachers, teachers with chronic illness. May not be a good idea for them to be the first to return to the classroom.
The Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health is supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Gun-related stocks are higher after a weekend of protests across the country. Among some of the gun names that are standing out today, Sturm Ruger, its shares up now by 9.6%. Smith & Wesson brands up by 16.1%. Vista Outdoor Inc. up now by 10.8%. 10-year down 3/30 seconds with a yield of 0.66%. Gold up 0.5%. 17.39 the ounce, and crude West Texas Intermediate up 0.6%. 35.69 a barrel. Again, recapping, equities higher with the S&P up 15, up 0.5%. I'm Charlie Pellett. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thanks so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week right here on Bloomberg Radio. I believe this is Pink Floyd, right?
But a different version, it sounds like.
Is it Us and Them?
It is.
There we go. Boom. Nailed it.
Done.
Thank you, Dave. I actually knew, I knew it.
Version from Dark Side of the Moon, Carol. So there you go.
That's what I thought. It was a little bit different, right?
Yeah,
well,
but
it kind of
it's
cuts
very
in the middle.
distinct.
Yeah.
There was actually a roadie for Pink Floyd who talked about that short, sharp shock, which you'll find in the headline of my latest chart. So that's
Wait, did you say you were a roadie for Pink Floyd? That's what I thought I heard.
It wasn't mine.
No, he said it was a roadie who came up with that phrase.
I just all of a sudden it took me to a whole different place. That's all I'm gonna say, Dave Wilson.
You know, you hear what you want to hear. What can I tell you?
That is so true.
If no truer words were ever said.
And if you look at stocks, you see what you want to see sometimes. And that brings me to the chart. You know, really taking a look at the S&P 500, you figure indeed what we went through in February and March was kind of a short, sharp shock because, you know, you had a record in February for the index and then, you know, you're in a bear market within the space of 5 weeks or less, depending on how you're counting. But what's interesting, you know, Willie Delwich, who's a strategist for Robert W. Baird, kind of pointed out what was going on with the value line geometric index. Now, this is an indicator. It's based on the companies that the Value Line Investment Survey tracks, about 1,700 of them. And it basically tracks the average performance day in and day out among those 1,700 stocks. So when you look at that indicator, you find out that it peaked back in August 2018, and that was about 18 months before the high was reached for the S&P 500. And then by the time you got to the lows of March, and the Value Line Geometric hit bottom on the same day as the S&P 500, it was down, the Value Line Index was down more than 48%. Now that sounds like a bear market. 18 months plus 48% decline. Not what we saw with the S&P 500, where it was off, 34% in the space of 5 weeks. So, it's an interesting bit of perspective, and how much has been said about, the biggest companies propping up the S&P 500 over time. You really see it in this comparison. And if you haven't seen the comparison yet, folks, send me an email. I'll get you the chart, the explanation that goes with it, and everything I do going forward. The email address is dwilson@bloomberg.net. That's dwilson@bloomberg.net.
I have a follow, but I do want to bring a headline to everyone because this is an important one. New York City will have a curfew. Governor Andrew Cuomo putting that out, making some comments on radio. So, again, New York City will indeed have a curfew. And that, of course, is in response to the protests that we've seen come up over the weekend around the country, of course, because of the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. So, again, Governor Andrew Cuomo saying that New York City will indeed have a curfew. Back to you, Dave, and your chart. So if we have U.S. stocks have been in a bear market for far longer and fallen much more than the S&P 500 suggests, does that make it much more real? Because I do feel like some people were kind of blowing it off a little bit and putting it to the nervousness over the virus and, maybe not giving it credit.
Well, more real, I suppose one way you could describe it. Another, it's just more typical.
Yeah.
Because, bear markets tend to stretch over a couple of years. I mean, we've seen that with the last few bear markets we've had in U.S. stocks. And, so the time frame you're talking about is much more what you might expect if you look at the Value Line Geometric Index than what you had with the S&P 500, where it was down, 34% in 5 weeks. That's really the point.
Yeah, it is. It's a really interesting point, and I like the analysis, too, because I feel like we are subject to some gyrations owing to, the different weightings and things like that we've talked about in this segment before. Dave Wilson, always making us smarter and bringing us some good music. We really appreciate it. We'll catch up with you right after the close of trading. And as we are taking a look at all the major indices, they remain in the green, not strongly up, but probably up in a way that we probably didn't expect when we came in this morning, and certainly looking at all the headlines last night, Carol, but a certain resilience there across all the major stock markets.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're staying, as you said, at our highs of the session. All right, we're going to get back to the markets in just a moment. Right now, though, let's get back to World and National News headlines and back to Mark Mills. Hi, Mark.
Hello, Carol. President Trump is doubling down on his hard-line reaction to the violent protests across the country. Bloomberg's Nathan Hager with the story.
CBS News says it's gotten audio from a teleconference the president held with governors on the unrest. The president reportedly told them, quote, "Most of you are weak," urging them to crack down even harder on demonstrators. In the president's words, quote, "They're going to run over you. You're going to look like a bunch of jerks. You have to dominate," end quote. On the call, the president told governors Washington will be under much more control. In his words, "We're going to pull in thousands of people." Nathan Hager, Bloomberg Radio.
Facebook employees became increasingly bold in expressing their dismay at CEO Mark Zuckerberg's decision not to take action on incendiary comments posted by President Trump, staging a virtual walkout. Several senior figures at Facebook, working from home, declared their strong disagreement online over the weekend, deciding not to log into work on Monday in protest. 2 Atlanta Police Department officers were fired Sunday after video showed them using excessive force against 2 college students during protests Saturday night. Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottom says the message of the protesters is understandable, but not the actions of those looting and causing destruction.
My fear is that
the message and the need for change will get lost in the destruction. And it is difficult when you have officers on the street who are human and they are fatigued and they are stressed.
Mark Zandi, chief economist at Moody's Analytics, says the protests highlight the depth of despair in America in the midst of a steep recession. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Mark Mills. Carolyn Jason?
Mark, thanks a lot. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Weekend. We are continuing amid all of this to look at a great reopening, or at least a cautious reopening. Carol, and Barclays coming out and saying they are going to return about 700 of its global staff to offices, and the rest of the folks working from home until at least the end of September. But, sort of slowly coming back, and certain functions, and there's going to be a lot of learning that happens over the next few months.
And there's going to be a lot of differences. We just heard about the Citibank story, right, that we talked about the amount of money that they've invested, right, so that it has enabled their traders in large part to work from home. And that was, I think, one of the biggest questions. What's interesting with Barclays is most of those that will be going back will be traders and others who cannot work from home.
Yeah.
And they're about 1% of global headcount. So we're talking about 700 staff to places in the UK, US, and also India. So it's interesting. As you said, Jason, the rest are going to work from home at least until the end of September. And I do wonder, people are approaching it differently, and probably they're approaching it differently based on what their setups are and maybe where their offices are located. But you do wonder what will be the lasting impact in terms of workers, being in major cities versus being in the suburbs versus maybe splitting their time between home and a shared office space. I guess time will tell about all of this. We've had some conversations where folks are like, listen, we're social beings, we're creatures, we like being part of a team in an office, and you do wonder how much of that ultimately sticks.
Yeah, I mean, I
or
think
is allowed
part of
to
it,
stick.
Well, I think part of it is going to really come down to job function, and there are some regulatory aspects to this. There are some customer service aspects to this. There are, even though it is relatively easy to set somebody up to work from home to do a fairly regular white-collar job. Trading requires advanced equipment and high-speed internet connections and things like that. So it'll be interesting to see how different banks and trading platforms come down on that. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week right here on Bloomberg Radio.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We've got 13 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell. And repeating an earlier headline, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo says New York City will have a curfew. The governor made the comment in a radio interview saying, quote, there is going to be a curfew. He added that 8,000 police officers will be out tonight. The Dow, the S&P, and Nasdaq, they're all higher, holding on to gains now with the S&P up 10 at 3,054, up by about 0.3%. The Dow's up 79, up 0.3. Nasdaq is up 60, up by 0.6%. Stocks higher as investors focus on signs of economic recovery amid further tension with China, lackluster virus drug test results, and the threat of further civil unrest in the United States. Right now, the 10-year is down 3/32 with a yield of 0.66%. Gold up 0.6%, 17.40 the ounce, and crude West Texas Intermediate up 0.1%, 35.51 a barrel. Again, recapping, equities higher with the S&P up 9, up 0.3%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no.
Who's gonna drive you home?
Honey, please, I'll do the driving.
Drive on.
Excuse me, I want to drive.
Just drive, baby.
It's the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
It is time for the Drive to the Close. Emily Rowland is back with us, co-chief investment strategist at John Hancock Investments, based in Boston, and that's exactly where we find her on this Monday. Emily, nice to have you back with Jason and myself. So tell us a little bit about kind of where we are in this market. We kicked off our broadcast a couple of hours ago. Gina Martin-Adams saying, looking at the outcome, we're seeing broad-based gains, stocks, a lot of them above their 200-day moving average, the S&P above it. I don't know. When you look at the market, what does it tell you?
Well, thanks, Carol, for having me today, and Jason. And certainly there's quite a bit of optimism that's being priced in by the markets today. And, it seems that we wake up every morning and futures are higher once again, despite some of the really negative headlines we're seeing. And certainly, with the country struggling right now, that's a challenge. We may see some recent events, start to dent some of the green shoots that we've started to see from an economic perspective. But really, at the end of the day, what it comes down to is markets are reacting to this incredible amount of fiscal and monetary stimulus that we've seen. The Fed's balance sheet is now sitting near $7 trillion. That's a 30% increase in just 3 months. Europe's getting its act together in terms of providing stimulus. Japan. So we continue to see this incredible support that's really outweighing all these challenges